I died on a Tuesday, and the worst part was how boring it was. No epic last stand, no glorious final words, nothing. Just a dungeon collapse, a falling rock, and one F-rank hunter named Ren Kato crushed under 3 tons of stone. Yeah, that's me. Ren. Lowest of the low. The guy other hunters didn't even bother insulting because I wasn't worth the breath. For 3 years, I'd been the joke of Hunter Association Branch 14. Everyone else awakened combat skills, elemental powers, blade arts. I got possession. Rank F, useless. The system tagged it garbage tier the moment it appeared on my status window, like it couldn't even pretend. Possession. Allows the user to temporarily inhabit the body of weaker creatures. Duration, 3 seconds. Cooldown, 24 hours. 3 seconds, once a day. Only on things weaker than me, and I was already the weakest guy in the entire building. My team leader laughed so hard he choked on his coffee. Bro, you can possess a rat for 3 seconds. Congrats, you're basically a wizard now. I spent 3 years carrying bags, getting left behind on easy missions, flinching every time someone said my name out loud. Let me back up a little, because you need to understand exactly how low the bar was before we get to the part where everything changes. Branch 14 wasn't even a real branch. It was a converted warehouse on the edge of the city, full of hunters nobody else wanted. I'd been there since I was 18, fresh out of the academy, holding a status sheet that made the recruiter laugh out loud in front of me. Possession, huh? He'd said, tapping the paper twice like it might change if he hit it hard enough. Congratulations, you're now Branch 14's problem. The other hunters had names like Iron Fang, Crimson Lance, names that belonged on trading cards. I was just Ren, rat guy, once they found out. Every single mission, I had one job. Stand near the door, watch the bags. Don't touch anything, don't activate anything, and don't try to help. The one time I actually tried using possession in a fight, I jumped into a goblin for 3 seconds, panicked, and ran face first into a wall. That clip got passed around the branch group chat for 2 years straight. People I'd never met would walk past and just whisper, "Wall guy?" So when I say nobody cared whether I lived or died, I mean it literally. 3 other hunters had already turned this job down before it reached me. It was a routine job. Old mining tunnel, low-tier monsters, mostly cleanup work clearing collapsed sections so a company could reopen the site. My team leader, a guy named Doran, only took the job because the pay was decent and he needed 5 names on the manifest to fill the quota. "You're coming because I need a 5th name," he told me flatly. "Stand near the entrance, don't touch the support beams, and we'll be out in 2 hours. I remember thinking at the time that this was probably the most normal day of my entire life. Show up, stand around, get paid, repeat. The tunnel smelled like wet stone and old explosives. Somebody had clearly tried mining here decades ago and given up halfway through the job. We cleared the first 3 chambers without trouble. A few cave slimes, 1 irritated rock crab, nothing that even raised anyone's heart rate at all. Doran kept checking his watch, muttering about dinner, while the other 3 hunters joked around like I wasn't even standing there. I was standing near a support beam in the 4th chamber, exactly where Doran told me not to stand, because that's where the entrance happened to be. Nobody noticed the crack running up the ceiling until it was too late. A hunter named Pharaoh accidentally clipped it with a sword swing meant for a slime. The sound wasn't dramatic, no grinding, no slow rumble, just a single sharp crack like a knuckle popping, and the whole ceiling section let go. Doran shouted something, everyone scattered, and for half a second I genuinely thought I might make it out, since I was closest to the exit. Then a support beam gave way directly above me, and 3 tons of stone came down in a wall of dust and noise that swallowed everything. I didn't even feel pain, not really, just pressure, sudden and total, like the world had decided to fold in on me from every direction. The last thing I saw through the dust was Doran's face, turned toward me with an expression that wasn't fear or grief, just mild annoyance. And then I was on my back, staring through a gap in the rubble at a sliver of gray sky, blood pooling out beneath me on the dungeon stone. I tried to move and nothing happened. I tried to call out and nothing came. My whole body had simply stopped taking instructions from me. So there I was, crushed flat, watching my own blood pool out on dungeon stone, thinking, wow, even my death is low budget. My parents stopped calling 2 years ago after I told them my rank. The apartment I was 3 weeks behind on rent for, all of it, replaying at once. The guild leader's voice echoed in my head, the one from orientation, saying, "And this is Ren, our resident comic relief," to a room full of laughing recruits. I thought, this is it. 19 years old, crushed under rocks nobody would clear for a week, and the system never gave me one moment that mattered. That's when the system did something it had never done before. A black screen, no status window, just text, slow, like something finally paying attention. Host has died. Possession skill condition met. Reevaluating skill parameters. Hidden requirements unlocked. I remember thinking, what hidden requirements? I'm dead. The system ignored me for 3 years, and now, of all times, it wanted to talk. The text kept scrolling like it didn't care my body was a pancake. Possession rank F revoked. New classification unknown. Unknown. Not E rank, not D rank, not even some joke rank invented to mock me one last time. Just unknown, like even the system had no category for this. A second line appeared, slower this time, almost deliberate. Possession requires a vessel. Vessel requires belief. Searching. Searching. The word just sat there, glowing faintly in whatever passed for my vision, my actual eyes long since closed for good. I didn't feel my body anymore. I didn't feel the rocks, the blood, the cold stone. I just felt that word, searching, stretching across some distance. Then everything went white, and something pulled me sideways, like my consciousness was being poured into a crack in the world. It wasn't painful exactly, more like being unraveled and rewoven at once. Every part of me stretched thin, then gathered up somewhere different. For a long, formless stretch of nothing, there was no sound, no light, no up or down, just that pulling sensation, steady and patient, like a current. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't on Dungeonstone. I was floating above a city I'd never seen, white marble and golden domes stretching out forever. The scale hit me first. Branch 14's entire warehouse could have fit inside one courtyard down there, and there were courtyards like that on every street. Below me, thousands of people knelt in a massive plaza, heads bowed, chanting in unison, in a language that somehow, impossibly, I understood perfectly. I tried to look at my hands and realized I didn't have hands. I didn't have a body. I was just there, aware, present, spread thin across something golden. Possession successful, the system said calmly, like it hadn't just shoved my mind into something that wasn't even a body anymore. Target acquired. The eternal flame, primary deity of the Aurelian Empire, worshipped by 40 million people across 6 provinces. I just sat there, if silence is even a thing when you don't have ears, turning the words over and over like they might rearrange into something sensible. I hadn't possessed a rat. I hadn't even possessed a person. I had possessed a god, or at least the idea of one, carved out of gold and centuries of belief. For a moment, I wondered if this was some afterlife glitch, a final cruel joke, dumping the lowest ranked hunter alive into the most absurd upgrade possible. Down below, an old woman in tattered robes lifted her face toward the massive statue I now somehow was, tears running down her cheeks, lips moving silently. "Eternal flame," she whispered. "Please, my son is sick. He won't survive the winter. I have nothing left to give but my faith." And here's the thing nobody warns you about when you accidentally become a god. I heard her. Not just her voice. Her thoughts, too, layered underneath. I felt her fear, her exhaustion, the weight of 3 sleepless nights, the ache in her knees from kneeling on cold stone, the guilt of no money for a healer. It hit me like a freight train, this raw human desperation pouring directly into whatever passed for my consciousness now. No filter, nothing in between. For 3 years, I'd been invisible. Nobody looked at me. Nobody cared if I lived or died, including, apparently, the universe, which filed me under unknown. And now I had 40 million people staring up at a statue, begging me, to notice they existed, to care, to do something, anything at all. The irony wasn't lost on me. The most ignored person in his old world had just become the most prayed to entity in a new one, and the timing was almost funny. I tried to focus on the old woman's prayer, tried to figure out if I could do anything, and the system pinged again, text appearing without warning. Host has discovered divine channel. Prayers directed at this vessel are now audible to host. Host may respond through priest intermediaries. Right, because gods don't text back directly, they whisper to the guy in fancy robes, and everyone else just trusts the message. I turned my attention toward the temple behind the statue, and that's when I noticed him. The high priest, standing at the altar like he'd been carved there. A tall man in golden robes, maybe 50, standing perfectly still with his eyes closed like he was listening for something that hadn't arrived in years. "Lord of Flame," he murmured, so quiet only I could hear it. "Give me a sign tonight. The council moves against Lady Theris tomorrow. Do you favor her survival?" And there it was. My first real glimpse into how this whole operation actually worked. The moment the entire illusion cracked open just a little bit. This wasn't just an old woman praying for her son. This was politics, court intrigue, and an empty golden statue everyone assumed was actually listening. Except now it wasn't empty. It was me, a dead F-rank hunter who 3 days ago couldn't even possess a sewer rat without slamming into a wall. The system pinged a 3rd time, and this time the text felt almost smug, like it was enjoying handing me the keys to something this enormous. A new skill unlocked, Voice of Faith. Host may communicate directly with any individual currently praying, through dreams, visions, or sudden thoughts. Range, unlimited within domain. I sat there, or floated there, whatever the verb is for a consciousness stuffed into a 40-foot golden statue. and started laughing internally. Not out loud, obviously, since I had no mouth, but the kind of laugh that comes right before you either cry or completely lose it entirely. 3 years of rat guy and wall guy, and standing near doors holding bags, and now I had direct access to the minds of an entire empire's believers. I focused on the High Priest again. His name, the system handed me without asking, was Cardinal Velmore, and he'd served for 41 years. 63 years old, and according to his own private thoughts, he hadn't actually believed in any god for the last 20 of those years. "Just give me something," Velmore whispered again, eyes still closed. "Anything, a feeling, a sign. I'll interpret it the way I need to anyway. He'll interpret it the way he needs to. That's the part nobody puts in the brochure for being a deity, the fine print under 40 million prayers. The priests don't actually need a god to talk to them. They just need plausible deniability for decisions they'd already made before walking in. But I had voice of faith now, and Velmore was actively, desperately praying, which meant the channel was wide open and humming with potential. So I did the only thing that felt natural to a guy who'd spent 3 years being told he didn't matter. I decided to matter, just this once. I pushed a single thought toward Velmore, as gently as I could figure out, since I had zero practice and genuinely expected nothing to happen. "Theris lives. The council moves tomorrow because they're afraid of her, not because she's weak," I told him, simple and direct. Velmore's eyes shot open. He staggered, grabbing the altar rail, his face draining of color so fast I thought I'd somehow killed him. "My lord," he breathed, voice shaking, barely audible. You spoke. After 20 years, you actually spoke to me, and that's when something hit me. Made the whole situation funnier and more dangerous at the same time, landing somewhere deep in my non-existent gut. This man had been faking a connection to his god for 2 decades, performing a role, going through motions for a job that paid well and asked no questions. And the one time the actual god showed up, he wasn't relieved. He was terrified, because now the lie he'd been living had teeth, sharp ones. The system chimed in, almost gleefully. "The host has triggered Cardinal Velmore's faith spike. Devotion increased by 340%. 340% from one sentence." I didn't even know what I was doing, and I'd already moved a number that big. I thought about my old guild leader, the one who laughed at my rat possession, and wondered what his face would look like seeing this. Probably wouldn't believe it. Probably would say, "Of course Ren broke the system, that's so him," and go right back to ignoring me. Except I wasn't F rank anymore. I wasn't ranked at all. The system threw my old classification away and replaced it with a question mark. Velmore dropped to his knees, robes pooling around him, hands trembling as he pressed his forehead to the cold stone floor of the empty temple. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive my doubt. Forgive these 20 years. I will do whatever you ask. I swear it on the flame itself." I sat there, this newly minted, accidental god, staring at a man offering unconditional loyalty, and thought, "Okay, Ren, don't mess this up." The system gave me one more detail before the scene shifted, the kind that made my non-existent stomach drop straight through the floor. Note, the Aurelian Empire is 3 days from declaring war on the Kestrel Dominion. High Priest's testimony will be cited as divine justification. War. They were about to start one and use my silence as the reason. 40 million people dragged into bloodshed because nobody ever asked the statue. Except now the statue could say something. Now the statue was me, and I knew exactly what it felt like to have no voice, to be talked over, never to. So when Velmore lifted his head, eyes wet, and whispered, "Lord, does the flame still favor war with Kestrel?" I didn't hesitate for a second. "The flame," I said, choosing every word like a lever, pulling on the entire empire at once, "favors patience above all else right now." Velmore's breath caught audibly. Across the plaza, the old woman praying for her son suddenly felt warmth bloom in her chest, an answer she didn't expect. I didn't plan that. I didn't even know I could. The system logged it. Passive effect. Comfort radiates to nearby believers during active voice of faith use. 40 million people. And apparently every word I said rippled outward to whoever happened to be praying right then, like a stone dropped in a vast pool. This wasn't a skill. This was a steering wheel attached to an entire civilization, handed to the guy whose death didn't even interrupt his team leader's dinner. Velmore rose slowly, wiping his eyes, and turned toward the doors with new steadiness, like a man given purpose again after decades of going through motions. "I will bring this to the council at dawn," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "The flame has spoken. War can wait." I watched him walk away through the candlelit hall, footsteps echoing off marble that had listened to empty prayers longer than I'd been alive. For 3 years, nobody listened to Renkato. Tonight, an empire was about to reroute its future because of 3 words from a guy who carried bags. The system pinged one final time, text glowing in the dark temple, the candle flames flickering in rhythm like they were responding to me. "Achievement unlocked," first whisper. Host has altered the course of an empire without revealing identity. Concealment rating, 100%. 100%. Nobody down there knew their god was an F-rank hunter who once ran into a wall mid-fight and became a meme for 2 years. I let that thought sit there, golden and warm and a little dangerous, like holding a coal in your palm and not getting burned yet, testing the rules. Then, because the universe wasn't done with me, the system added one more line, the kind of detail you only notice after signing the contract. Warning, possession is permanent. There is no host body to return to. The eternal flame is now your only form. I stared at that sentence for what felt like a long time, even though time probably didn't mean anything to me anymore. Not in any way I understood. No body to return to. No going back. Whatever Ren Kato used to be, that was gone, crushed under rock, his name already fading from rosters. But the eternal flame, that was still here, still standing, still prayed to by 40 million people whose faith was finally actually being heard. I thought about all those years being ignored, being told my power was a joke, the punchline at every guild meeting and recruitment cycle. And then I thought about Velmor walking toward the council at dawn, carrying my 3 whispered words like scripture, words that might stop a war. If this was the body I was stuck with, fine, I could work with this. I had 40 million ears listening for a voice, and finally, one worth using. Down in the temple, the candles flickered. The old woman finished her prayer and rose, feeling lighter than she had in weeks, unable to explain why. And somewhere above her, inside cold gold starting to feel less like a prison and more like a throne, I started planning what came next. The plaza slowly emptied as night deepened, worshippers filing out through the bronze doors, leaving only guards and the faint smell of incense. I used the quiet to take stock of myself, reaching outward the way you'd stretch sore muscles after waking up somewhere unfamiliar. The statue, I realized, wasn't just a statue. It was connected to something deeper, threads of golden light branching towards smaller shrines across the city. Every one of those shrines, somehow, was technically also me, the same way a single nerve ending is technically also you, even far from your brain. I could feel faint echoes from each one, distant murmurs of prayer too quiet to make out, like standing in a crowd catching fragments of conversations. The system pinged again with a softer chime, almost gentler than the others, like it was easing me into the next part of the tutorial. Domain map available. A host may view all consecrated locations currently linked to this vessel across every province of the Empire. A map unfolded across my awareness, like suddenly knowing the layout of a city you'd never visited, every street and shrine appearing fully formed. The capital alone had over 200 shrines to the eternal flame. The Empire, across 6 provinces, had thousands, each a thread back to this statue. 40 million believers, thousands of shrines, one golden statue at the center holding a dead F-rank hunter who'd been worried about rent. It was almost too much to process at once, and for a moment I just let the information sit there, unsorted, while I tried to figure out where to start. Then I noticed something odd. One thread on the map, smaller than most, near the eastern border, was flickering, pulsing like it was struggling. I focused on it instinctively, the way you'd glance toward a sound that didn't belong, and the system responded like it had been waiting for this. Anomaly detected. Shrine of the Eternal Flame, Korin Province. Devotion critically low. Governor suspected of redirecting temple funds for 11 years. 11 years. Someone had been quietly stealing from a god for over a decade, and nobody, not Velmor, not the council, not the deity itself, had noticed. Until now. Until me. A dead hunter robbed of his own mission, pay by guild fees he never agreed to. Staring at a governor doing the same thing. Bigger. I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness or anger exactly, more like recognition. Like finally having the tools to fix a problem you'd lived with forever. For 3 years, people took things from me and I couldn't stop them. Tonight, I had access to the minds of an empire, and somewhere a governor was in trouble. I didn't act yet. Not that night. I was still figuring out the basics, still testing how far Voice of Faith reached, still adjusting to being light and gold. But I filed it away. Korin Province. 11 years of stolen devotion. A governor who thought nobody was watching, because for 11 years nobody had been. He had no idea the statue in his province's largest temple had just woken up, and that the thing inside it knew exactly what people like him did to people like me. The candles in the capital temple burned low, the last worshippers gone, and Velmor's footsteps faded down a marble corridor toward the council chambers. 40 million people slept that night, most with no idea anything had changed. But somewhere in the gold above their heads, something had, and it was starting. Morning came the way it always does in a city that doesn't sleep, slow and gray at first, then loud, carts rattling, vendors shouting, temple bells ringing. I'd spent the night, or whatever the equivalent was, just listening. Thousands of voices layered together, prayers and complaints and small private hopes. It was overwhelming at first, but by sunrise I'd figured out something useful. I could choose what to focus on, like adjusting a dial on an old radio. Most prayers were small. A merchant wanting good weather, a child wanting a puppy, a soldier wanting to come home in one piece. Nothing world-altering, but some prayers carried weight, the kind that came from people with actual power, people whose private thoughts could move armies and budgets and laws. Velmore's prayer last night had been one of those. This morning, as the sun rose over the council chamber, I felt another begin, sharper and more desperate. It came from a young woman kneeling in a private chapel attached to the residence of Lady Theris, the very person Velmore had been asking about. "Eternal flame," she whispered, knuckles white from how tightly her hands were clasped. "If you're real, please don't let them take everything from her." Her name, the system told me, was Mira, Theris's personal attendant, the kind of person whose entire life depended on someone else's survival. I focused on her the way I had the old woman, and immediately felt the shape of what was happening. The council session wasn't political theater, it was a trap. Lady Theris, it turned out, was one of the few council members who'd consistently opposed the push toward war, and others wanted her removed for it. The charge was heresy, based on a letter Theris had written questioning whether the Empire's wars were actually divinely sanctioned at all. In other words, she'd said out loud what Velmore privately believed for 20 years, that their god never answered anyone, and they wanted to execute her for it. If they succeeded, the message to everyone else would be clear. Question the war, question the silence, and you disappear, no exceptions, no warnings. And the part that made my non-existent blood boil was that they planned to present this letter today in front of the council as proof of her crime. Except Velmore had already told them last night the flame favored patience. If that got out first, the heresy case would look exactly like what it was. I realized with a kind of dizzying clarity that I had accidentally set up the perfect counter-move last night without even meaning to do it. All I needed was the timing to line up. Mira was praying right now, desperate, scared, the channel wide open exactly the way Velmore's had been before. I reached toward her the way I had Velmore, carefully, gently, trying not to overwhelm whatever this connection actually was on the other end. "The flame already spoke last night," I said, choosing words slowly. "Velmore carries the message. Theris isn't the one who doubts. Tell her to wait." Mira's eyes flew open. For a second she just sat there, frozen, like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened inside her own head. Then she scrambled up, nearly knocking over an offering bowl, and actually ran, down the corridor toward Theris's private study. I couldn't see what happened next directly, but I felt it ripple outward minutes later when Theris herself, kneeling at a small altar, sent her own prayer. It wasn't desperate like Mira's. It was sharp, focused, the prayer of someone testing a theory. If the flame spoke last night, let Velmore say so today. I almost laughed again. Even cornered, facing execution, this woman was thinking 3 steps ahead, using one piece of information like a chess player. "He will," I told her simply. "Watch his face when they'd bring up the letter. He already knows what I think of silence." I felt her breath catch, the same way Velmore's had the night before, that specific jolt of someone realizing the universe had actually responded. She didn't say anything else. She rose, smoothed her robes, and walked toward the chamber with the calm steps of someone holding a weapon nobody else knew existed. The council chamber was a massive circular room, tiered seating around a central floor, golden light pouring through high windows designed to feel divine. I couldn't see it directly yet, but Velmore was there, and the moment he stepped through the doors, I felt his prayer flicker to life again, quieter. "Lord, give me the strength to say what needs saying," he murmured, barely audible, robes settling as he took his seat among the senior clergy. "You already have it," I told him. "You've had it for 20 years. You just forgot you were allowed to use it." I felt something in him shift, some old weight settling differently, like a man finally putting down a bag he'd carried so long he forgot it was heavy. The session began with formalities, readings, procedural nonsense that existed mostly to remind everyone how important the people in the room were. Then one of the council members pushing the heresy case, a thin man named Lord Ashvaughan, stood and produced the letter with theatrical solemnity. "This document," he announced, voice carrying easily, "represents a direct challenge to divine authority. Lady Theris has questioned the flame's guidance." I felt the room's attention shift toward Theris, dozens of prayers flickering at once, the way a crowd reacts when it senses blood in the water. Theris didn't flinch. She stood calmly, hands folded, said nothing, exactly the way Mira had described her acting in situations like this before. Ashvaughan pressed on, clearly enjoying himself. "Will the Cardinal confirm that such doubt constitutes heresy under the laws of the Eternal Flame?" And there it was. The moment Velmore had dreaded for years, where he'd normally nod along, give the answer everyone expected, protect his position. Except last night, for the first time in 20 years, his God had actually spoken to him, and that changes a man more than people expect. Velmor rose slowly, and I felt his prayer steady itself, the nervous flutter from earlier settling into something calmer, almost resolute and steady. "The flame spoke to me last night," he said, and the entire chamber went absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has actual weight to it. For the first time in my service, the flame gave a direct message. It said the flame favors patience regarding the war with Kestrel. Ashvain's expression flickered, just slightly, the look of a man whose script had suddenly been ripped out of his hands without warning. "And as for doubt," Velmor continued, voice gaining strength, "I doubted for 20 years. I prayed and heard nothing and assumed nothing was there." A murmur ran through the chamber, dozens of small prayers spiking at once, shock rippling outward like another stone dropped into that continent-wide pool. "Last night," Velmor said, "I learned I was wrong. If doubt born from silence is heresy, then I am the greatest heretic here, and the flame can judge me for it." The silence that followed was different, heavier, like the entire chamber was holding its breath, waiting to see if anything would actually happen. I almost didn't do it. Part of me wanted to let the moment sit. But then I felt another prayer, faint, from the back of the chamber, quiet and embarrassed. It came from a young clerk, barely more than a teenager, eyes wide, lips barely moving. "Please, let this be real. Please let someone tell the truth in here." That one got me. Maybe because it reminded me so much of myself, 3 years of standing near doors, hoping someone, anyone, would finally notice me. So I answered, not just Velmor this time, letting the response ripple through every open channel in that chamber, every prayer, every silent hope at once. "The flame does not punish honesty," I said, and felt the words spread like warmth through sunlight. "It punishes those who speak in its name for themselves." The system logged it with clinical precision. Mass faith event triggered. Devotion increased across 340 individuals. Heresy charge dismissed unanimously. Unanimous. Even Ashvain voted to dismiss it, because with his own god apparently speaking directly into the room, guilty had nowhere left to land. Theris remained standing exactly where she'd been, calm, composed, though I felt relief washing through her prayer like a held breath finally released. She didn't thank the flame out loud, not in any way the council would notice, but quietly, she sent one more thought toward the altar at the edge of the room. "Whoever you actually are," she thought carefully, like she suspected this wasn't quite the deity she'd grown up hearing about. "Thank you. I won't waste this." I didn't respond to that one, partly because I didn't know what to say, and partly because something about it made the hair stand up on a neck I didn't have. "Whoever you actually are." Like she already knew something had changed, that the silence everyone grew comfortable with had broken into something new entirely. I filed that thought away too. Right next to Corin Province, a growing list in a city of 40 million people unaware their god existed for less than a day. The council session ground on through the afternoon, and I let most of it pass unfocused, the way you'd let background noise wash over you while thinking. What I kept coming back to was the math. One sentence to Velmor, one to Mira, one to Theris. 3 sentences, and an empire's path had bent direction. For 3 years, I'd watched people make decisions affecting my life without asking what I thought. Doran deciding where I'd stand, the recruiter laughing. Now I was the one making decisions, except the scale had changed completely. These weren't choices about where to stand. These were choices about wars. The system pinged softly, almost reading my thoughts, with a new notification calmer than the others, like it was checking in casually. Host status update. Devotion network expanding. Estimated total believers reached today, 340 direct, 12,000 indirect through mass faith ripple. 12,000 people in one day. Most of whom just felt a little more comfort during morning prayers, the same way the old woman had felt lighter. I thought about that old woman, the one praying for her sick son, and wondered if there was something I could actually do for her now that I understood more. The system answered before I finished the thought. Note, direct intervention requires either a voice of faith during active prayer or a priest intermediary. In other words, I couldn't just wave a hand and cure a kid. I needed someone praying or willing to act, a bridge between me and the physical world. That gave me an idea, the kind that felt small in the moment, but that I had a strange growing certainty would matter a lot more later on. Cardinal Velmor, freshly emboldened after 20 years of silence finally breaking, was exactly the bridge I needed, and he had no idea how far this went. That evening, after the session ended, Velmor returned to the temple alone, walking through the gardens instead of the direct corridor, like he needed time. He stopped in front of the altar, the same spot as the night before, except now his eyes were open, looking up at the statue like seeing it for the first time. "I don't fully understand what happened today," he said quietly, not whispering anymore, "but I'll listen more carefully. If you want something done, Lord, I'm here." I considered that. This 63-year-old man who'd faked faith for 2 decades, now offering it for real, with no idea his lord had been dead a day. "There's a woman in this city," I said slowly, "praying for her sick son. She came to the temple last night. Find her and get the boy seen by a healer tonight." Velmore's eyes widened slightly, then softened. The look of a man relieved his god's first real request was something this simple, this human and small. "It will be done," he said, and meant it, in a way the system quietly logged as a small devotion spike, smaller than the chamber, but it felt more important to me. That was the first thing I actually changed. Not a war, not a heresy trial. One sick kid, one scared mother, one promise that would actually get kept. I thought about Branch 14, about all the times someone could have done something small like that for me and just didn't because I wasn't worth their time. Down in the city, as evening settled over marble and gold, a healer was being summoned to a small apartment, and an old woman was about to get a miracle. And somewhere above her, inside cold gold that felt less like a prison with every passing hour, I sat with that thought for a long time, letting it settle. 3 years of being invisible, 1 day of being a god. And the thing that felt most right, out of everything, the council, the war, was the smallest item on the list. I had a feeling that wouldn't be the last time that turned out to be true. Not by a long shot, not even close. If you were Ren, watching an empire's politics bend around 3 sentences while still learning the basics of your own power, what would you focus on next? The corrupt governor in Corrin, expanding your reach across the empire, or just quietly helping people like that old woman, one prayer at a time? Drop your thoughts below and stick around. 3 days passed, and what I can only describe as the strangest on-the-job training of 2 entire lifetimes. Mine and whatever this counted as. By the 3rd night, I'd figured out the rough shape of my own power, the way you'd figure out a new apartment by walking into door frames a few times. Voice of Faith worked best with people actively praying, the connection strongest when someone's mind was open, desperate, or genuinely listening for once. The domain map kept expanding too, slowly, as I got used to reaching further. Shrines I couldn't sense on day 1 started flickering into focus by day 3. And then there was the other thing. The thing the system hadn't explained yet. The thing that made possession feel like an absurdly small name for what this actually was. It started with a dream. Not mine, since I didn't sleep anymore in any normal sense. Someone else's dream, bleeding into my awareness completely uninvited. A boy, maybe 12, asleep in a small house somewhere in the outer district, dreaming about a festival from his childhood, fire dancers and bright lanterns everywhere. I felt it the way you'd feel sunlight through a window, warm and distant, nothing I'd asked for. It was just there, like the boy's mind had a door left open somehow. The system pinged, quieter than usual, almost curious about its own discovery. Passive ability detected. Dream resonance. Host may perceive dreams of believers during sleep. I sat with that for a long moment. Dreams. I could see people's dreams now, not because I was trying to, but because belief didn't just open a door for talking. It opened a door for everything, apparently, whether I wanted it open or not, which was unsettling to say the least. That night I drifted through dozens of dreams across the capital, never lingering, just brushing past them like walking through a hallway of open doors. A baker dreaming about burnt bread and an angry customer. A soldier dreaming about a battle that hadn't happened yet. Anxiety wearing a costume like always. And then, near the city's edge, I found one that stopped me completely. A woman, mid-30s, dreaming about a man with sharp features, standing over a map of the empire. The dream man wasn't speaking, just pointing at locations on the map, one by one, each mark glowing red as his finger touched it, like he was planning something methodical. I didn't recognize him, but the woman's fear was so specific, so detailed, that it felt less like an ordinary nightmare and more like a memory trying to surface again. The system supplied a name without me asking, the same passive omniscience that gave me Velmore's history on day 1. Subject, Caressa Vone, retired intelligence officer. A retired intelligence officer having recurring nightmares about a man planning something on a map of the empire. That wasn't random anxiety. That was a buried memory. I made a mental note, the same way I had with Corrin Province, and let the dream fade as morning approached and her sleep grew lighter, the image dissolving like mist. By the 4th day, Cardinal Velmore had become something close to what I'd call my actual employee, except one who genuinely believed he was working for a real deity. The old woman's son had recovered. Velmore had personally overseen it, sending not just a healer, but checking back twice to make sure the treatment was working properly. Word of it had spread through the Eastern District quietly, the way good news does among people used to bad news. A small ripple of the temple actually helped this time. The system logged it without fanfare. Devotion network expanding. New believers in Eastern District 1200. Source, word of mouth regarding healed child. 1,200 people, just from one kid getting better. I sat with that number, thinking about how cheap it had been for me and how enormous it had been for them. That's when I decided it was time to finally deal with Korin Province properly, instead of just filing it away like everything else on my growing list. I brought it to Velmor the way I'd learned to bring things to him during evening prayer, when the temple was quiet and his mind was open and unguarded. "There's a problem in Korin Province," I said. "The shrine has been neglected for 11 years. I want you to send someone to investigate the local governor quietly." Velmor's prayer paused, like someone setting down a cup of tea very carefully. "Korin, my lord? Small province, mostly farmland. What kind of problem are we talking about?" "Temple funds redirected for over a decade," I said. "The governor's been stealing from the Flames' collections and covering it with falsified provincial records." There was a long silence, and I felt something shift in Velmor's prayer, a kind of cold clarity settling where uncertainty had been just a moment before. "If that's true," he said slowly, "it's not just theft from the church. It's theft from the people of Korin, dressed up as religious donation meant for relief." I hadn't even considered that angle, honestly. I'd been thinking about it as theft from me, the abstract eternal flame. Velmor was thinking about who actually paid for it. "How would you investigate this without tipping him off?" I asked, genuinely curious, since this was exactly the kind of thing I had zero experience with. "There's a clerical auditor position that rotates between provinces," Velmor said. "Korin is due next month. I could move the timeline up, send someone I trust early." "Do it," I said, quietly. "I want to know what he's been doing with the money, not just that he's been taking it from people who need it." Velmor's prayer carried something I hadn't felt from him before, a grim satisfaction, the feeling of a man who'd gone through motions for decades, finally doing something real. "There's a young auditor named Soren Pike," he said, sharp, thorough, ambitious in the right way. "He's been waiting for an assignment like this for years." "Send him," I said. "And Velmor, don't tell him the Flame asked for this specifically. Let him think it's routine, something that happened to matter on its own." I wasn't entirely sure why I said that, but it felt important. If the Flame personally intervening became the norm, it would stop feeling like Velmor's choices and start feeling like mine alone. "As you wish," Velmor said, and I felt the faint warmth of understanding in his prayer, like he'd caught the shape of what I meant without needing it, explained further. 3 days later, Soren Pike arrived in Korin Province with a small escort and a stack of ledgers, looking exactly like what he was supposed to be, a bored auditor on rotation. I couldn't follow him directly, not without a shrine to anchor to, but Korin had one shrine, the flickering one I'd noticed on the domain map, enough for a thin, distant thread. Through that thread, I caught fragments. A small, dusty temple, its single resident priest, an elderly man who'd clearly given up on most duties years ago from sheer exhaustion. The priest's name, the system told me, was Father Halden, 71 years old, and his prayers, when he bothered, had a particular flavor of bitterness I recognized instantly. It was the flavor of someone who'd asked for help for years, got nothing back, and finally just stopped expecting any answer at all. That evening, Halden knelt at his small altar out of habit more than faith, and I felt his prayer form, tired and flat, words worn smooth from repeating too often. "Eternal flame," he murmured. "If you're listening, which I doubt, the roof leaks again, the children's shelter hasn't had heat in 2 winters, and Marrow still hasn't released this year's funds." I felt something twist in whatever served as my chest, 2 winters without heating, while somewhere in this province, a governor had been quietly pocketing the money meant for exactly this. For the first time since waking up in this golden statue, I felt something that wasn't curiosity or excitement. I felt angry, properly angry, the kind that burns cold instead of loud. "Father Halden," I said, and felt him freeze mid-prayer, the way Velmor had on that first night, the shock of an answer after years of nothing but silence. "You're listening?" he whispered, voice cracking slightly. "After all this time, you're actually listening to an old man complain about a roof?" "I've always been listening," I said, which wasn't technically true, but felt true enough. "The allotment that's been missing. How long has this actually been happening?" "Years," Halden said. An old frustration poured out of him in a way that told me he'd been holding this in far longer than just tonight's conversation alone. Marrow always has an excuse. Bad harvest, transport delays, administrative errors. Always something that sounds reasonable enough that nobody bothers to check. "It stops now," I said. "There's an auditor in this province right now from the capital. His name is Soren Pike. When he comes here, tell him everything. Don't hold back anything." Halden's prayer shifted, something cautious creeping in. The wariness of a man who'd learned hope was expensive and often got taken away again before it mattered. "And if Marrow finds out I talked?" Halden asked quietly. "He has people, Lord. People who make problems disappear quietly without anyone asking questions after." That stopped me cold. Marrow had people who made problems disappear. This wasn't an empire-level abstraction anymore. This was real, immediate danger to a tired old man. Then we make sure he doesn't find out until it's too late to matter, I said, meaning it, even though I had no idea yet how I'd actually back that promise up. The system, almost as if waiting for this exact moment, pinged with something new. New skill available? Shared sight? Host may perceive through a devoted believer's eyes during prayer. Shared sight. I could actually see through someone's eyes now, not just hear their thoughts. I filed it away, but something told me I'd be using it sooner rather than later. Pray when Pike arrives, I told Halden. Just a short prayer, nothing obvious. I'll be watching, and if anything goes wrong, I'll know about it immediately. Halden's prayer carried something fragile, the first flicker of actual hope I'd felt from him, the kind that's almost more painful than despair because it can still be taken. I don't know who you really are, he said quietly, but thank you for finally answering after all these years. 2 days later, Soren Pike arrived at the small temple in Corin Hollow, exactly as Velmor had arranged, carrying his ledgers and his bored auditor expression like a costume. Halden met him at the door, and I felt the old priest's prayer flicker to life the moment Pike stepped inside, a short, nervous murmur, just enough to open the channel. Through shared sight, the world snapped into focus differently than anything before. Sharper, more immediate, like frosted glass, had been wiped clean all at once. I could see Pike clearly, a man in his late 20s with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, the kind of person who'd spent years doing careful work nobody noticed. Father Halden, Pike said with the polite, distracted tone of someone going through a checklist. Routine audit of temple finances and provincial allotments. Shouldn't take long. Of course, Halden said, hesitating, weighing the risk one more time before finally committing. Before you do, there's something you should see, something I've kept a long time. Pike's expression shifted, the bored checklist look replaced by something sharper, the look of a man whose instincts had just told him this wasn't routine after all. Halden led him to a small back room, little more than a closet, and pulled a wooden box from beneath a loose floorboard, the kind of hiding spot built over years of waiting. Receipts, Halden said, opening the box to reveal stacks of paper, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Every allotment that was supposed to arrive and what actually did for 11 years. Pike's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the first stack, the trembling of someone realizing this assignment was about to become the most important thing he'd ever done. 11 years, Pike repeated, flipping through pages, his eyes moving faster, doing math in his head. Father, do you understand what this represents? A paper trail of systematic theft? I've known for 11 years, Halden said quietly. I just never had anyone to give it to, who wouldn't be bought off by Marrow before they finished reading the first page. Why give it to me? Pike asked, and I felt the question land with more weight than he probably intended. The question of a man not understanding why today was different. I felt Halden hesitate, worried he'd say something that would make this whole conversation sound insane. The priest who claims his God told him to talk. Call it faith, Halden said simply, and left it there, which honestly was probably the smartest answer he could have given in this exact moment. Pike didn't push further. He carefully repacked the box, his expression grim and focused, in a way that told me Velmor had chosen exactly the right person for this job. I'll verify this against the Capitol's records, Pike said. If everything matches, Governor Marrow is looking at charges that go well beyond simple corruption now. How long will that take? Halden asked, the old anxiety creeping back, the fear this might still somehow slip away before it actually mattered to anyone. A few days, if I'm careful, Pike said. I need to look like I'm still doing the routine audit. If Marrow suspects anything, he'll destroy records, intimidate witnesses, disappear. That word again, disappear. The weight of it settled over the conversation, and through shared sight I caught movement outside the temple's small window, someone passing too slowly. Father, Pike said quietly, noticing it too, is that one of Marrow's men? Or the one in the gray coat by the well? Halden's prayer spiked with fear, sharp and immediate, and the temperature of the whole connection shifted, like a room suddenly getting colder around us. That's Tobin, Halden whispered. He works for the governor's household. He doesn't usually come this far into the village at all. I didn't wait to think this through. I reached out through shared sight, focusing on the figure in gray, and the system responded almost instantly with information. New target identified, Tobin Greaves, household enforcer for Governor Marrow. Currently praying, channel open and available. He was praying. Of all people, the governor's enforcer, the man who made problems disappear, was currently praying, which meant a voice of faith could reach him too. I almost didn't act. Part of me hesitated, because everything so far had been about helping people, and reaching into someone like Tobin felt like crossing into new territory. But then I thought about Halden, 2 winters without heating, 11 years of stolen funds, and a man in gray slowing down outside a temple at exactly the wrong moment. I focused on Tobin's prayer. It was small, almost an afterthought, the kind people say out of habit. Eternal Flame, let today be uneventful. I hate this assignment so much. He hated this assignment. That told me something. Whatever Tobin was, he wasn't necessarily eager about whatever Marrow had him doing, and that gave me an angle I hadn't expected. It will be uneventful, I said, pushing the thought gently into his mind. If you walk past this temple and don't look back, whatever you think you saw doesn't matter at all. I felt Tobin's prayer flicker with surprise, that same jolt I'd felt from Velmore and Mira and Halden, the shock of an answer where there had only ever been silence before now. Through the thin edge of his attention, I caught a fragment of his actual thoughts beneath the prayer. Tobin wasn't just an enforcer doing a job. He was tired, scared, and unhappy. Did the flame just talk to me? Tobin thought, half to himself, the kind of thought that comes right before someone decides they're losing their mind entirely. I don't usually talk to people like you, I said honestly, but today, walking away is the right thing to do. For once, do the right thing without anyone forcing you. Through Holden's eyes, I watched the figure in gray pause outside the window one more long second, then turn and walk away down the road, not looking back even once. Pike let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. He's gone. Good. Father, I need to leave quietly and start cross-referencing this tonight. Sooner I finish, sooner we act. Go, Halden said. And thank you. Both of you, whoever you really are, after all these years of silence finally ending. His prayer settled into something calmer after Pike left. Exhaustion mixed with the strange, fragile beginning of hope, the kind that comes after years of having none at all. The system pinged once more before I let the connection fade. Voice of faith, used on non-believer subject. Tobin Greaves, effect. Faith spike, minor. Devotion, 4%. 4%? From a man who hated his job and had spent maybe 30 seconds hearing a voice tell him to do something he probably wanted to do anyway already. It wasn't much, but it confirmed something I'd been wondering since the dream of Caressa Vone 3 nights earlier. This power worked on anyone listening, even people who didn't know they were. That thought sat with me for a long time after the connection faded, the implications slowly unfolding the way ink spreads through water, quiet and unstoppable once started. If Voice of Faith could reach anyone praying, even casually, even out of habit, even people who hated the institutions built around the eternal flame, then the Empire wasn't my only audience. Anyone, anywhere, who said a single word toward the sky in a moment of stress, fear, or hope was a door I could potentially knock on now. I thought about my old life again, comparing every new piece of this power to the absence of power I'd lived with for 3 solid years before this. Back then, even shouting at the top of my lungs, nobody would have heard me. Now, the quietest, most reluctant prayer could open a channel straight into someone's head. It was, I realized, an almost obscene amount of power for someone who used to get mocked for running into walls during fights nobody cared about anyway. 3 more days passed. Pike worked through the records with obsessive focus, what Velmore later described as the look of a man who finally found something worth being thorough about. On the 4th day, Pike returned with a sealed report, and Velmore met with him personally, the 2 reviewing findings in a private chamber I could listen through. 11 years, Pike said, laying out documents. Marrow systematically diverted allotments meant for relief, infrastructure, and shelter funding across the entire province. The total comes to just under 2 million in gold equivalent, Pike continued, and Velmore's prayer went very still, the stillness before a decision long building. 2 million, Velmore repeated, and the people of Corrin were told this money never arrived, while their governor built an estate 3 times the provincial seat's size. That's what the records support, Pike said carefully. Cardinal, this isn't just a religious matter now. The Imperial Treasury will need to be involved at this point. Then involve them, Velmore said, and I felt something new in his prayer. Quiet steel, the steel of a man done with 20 years of not making waves at all. There's something else, Pike said, hesitating. Halden mentioned Marrow's enforcer was seen near the temple the day I arrived. He left, but if Marrow learns of this first... He won't, Velmore said simply. The Treasury moves tomorrow morning. I've arranged it already, contingent on your findings. Marrow gets no warning at all. I felt a flicker of pride, watching Velmore operate. 4 days ago, he'd been a man going through motions for decades. Now he coordinated corruption investigations with calm efficiency. The next morning, I felt it through the thin thread to Corrin's shrine. A sudden surge of activity, soldiers and Treasury officials arriving with no advance notice whatsoever. I couldn't see the arrest directly, but I felt Father Halden's prayer that evening, and it told me everything I needed to know about how the day had gone. Eternal flame, he said, and for the first time since I'd started listening, his prayer carried something new entirely. Joy. Actual, uncomplicated joy after years of nothing. They took him this morning, Marrow, in chains, in front of the whole provincial seat. The Treasury official said the shelter gets proper funding by next week. I let that settle a moment before responding. Good, I said simply, because, honestly, What else was there left to say about any of it? I don't know how you did this, Halden continued, or why, after all these years, you suddenly decided to. But the children sleep warm tonight, and I wanted you to know that. I didn't respond to that one either, not because I had nothing to say, but because for a moment I genuinely couldn't figure out how to put it into words at all. 2 winters without heat. Fixed, because a dead F-rank hunter had gotten annoyed about it enough to actually do something for once in either life. The system pinged, and this time the notification felt heavier, like it was marking something significant rather than just logging another number for the records. Major faith event recorded. Koran province devotion increased by 1,800%. Province-wide belief restored. New devotion network node established. Koran hollow. 1,800%. An entire province that had spent 11 years feeling forgotten by their god, suddenly remembering, all at once, that maybe they hadn't been. I thought about something Theris had said days ago in that council chamber. Whoever you actually are. That question wasn't curiosity. It was people noticing something had changed. That night, as Koran slept under repaired roofs and Halden prayed a final peaceful prayer before bed, I found myself drifting again, through dream resonance, the sense from days earlier. And this time, instead of brushing past dreams like before, I found myself lingering on one in particular, belonging to someone I hadn't expected to encounter again this soon. Caressavone was dreaming again. The same man, the same map, the same red marks spreading across the empire one by one, methodical and patient as ever. But this time, the dream went further than before, like something in her mind had shifted enough to remember more, or like the dream itself was finally ready to show me more. The man with sharp features turned in the dream and looked directly at the dreamer, directly at Caressa, directly, somehow, at me as well. "They're still listening," he said, in a voice that didn't belong in a dream, too clear, too deliberate, too aware. Even now, especially now of all times. I felt something cold settle through whatever passed for my awareness. The dream man wasn't just a memory anymore. He was aware of being observed, somehow, by something. The system, for the first time since I'd arrived in this body, took a long moment before responding, almost like it was processing something unexpected for itself, too. Warning. Anomalous entity detected within dream resonance. Source unclear. Recommend caution going forward from here. Recommend caution. After everything that had happened this past week, the council chamber, an entire province, this was the first time the system had ever used that word. I pulled back from the dream slowly, the way you'd back away from something in the dark you couldn't quite see, but knew was looking back at you the whole time. Caressavone stirred in her sleep, and for just a fraction of a second I felt her wake slightly, eyes still closed, murmuring something into her pillow quietly. "He's awake," she mumbled, barely audible even to me. "The god is awake. He needs to know about the marks on the map before it's too late for everyone." Then she settled back into deeper sleep, and the dream faded entirely, leaving me alone with the strange feeling of having just been seen by something with no context. I spent the rest of that night turning the moment over and over. The marks on the map. The man who knew he was being watched. Caressavone suddenly murmuring about gods. For the first time since waking up in this golden statue, I had the distinct feeling I wasn't just discovering the rules of my own power on my own terms anymore. I was discovering that someone else had been waiting for me to discover them first, and had been waiting for a while. The next morning I brought it to Velmore carefully, the way I'd learned to phrase things that might sound insane, even to someone who already believed I was a god. "There's a woman in the capital," I said during his morning prayer. "Caressavone, retired intelligence officer. I need to know why she retired and what classified means." Velmore's prayer carried a flicker of surprise, the kind that came whenever I asked for something outside the usual scope of temple business entirely. "That's outside my normal reach, my lord. Intelligence records are sealed, even from the church, even from someone in my position with my history." "Then find someone who can reach it," I said. "This matters. I think it might matter more than anything else we've dealt with so far in this whole week." I felt Velmore consider this, weighing it the way he'd learned to weigh my requests, not as commands, but as pieces of a picture he was slowly starting to see. "There's someone," he said slowly. "Lady Theris. Before the council, she served in military intelligence herself. She could reach sealed records without raising alarms." Theris. The woman whose execution I'd accidentally prevented less than a week ago, who'd ended that encounter with a prayer that still echoed. "Whoever you actually are." "Bring it to her," I said, carefully. "And Velmore, if she asks who's asking, tell her the truth. Tell her the flame itself is asking, directly, by name." I felt Velmore's prayer settle into something thoughtful, almost amused, the reaction of a man curious where all of this was actually heading after this much chaos already. "As you wish, my lord," he said, though after everything this week, she may have already started asking questions of her own without anyone prompting her. He wasn't wrong. That same day I felt a new prayer form, sharp and deliberate, the same quality I'd felt during the council chamber days before, unmistakable. It was Theris, and her prayer wasn't desperate or grateful or even curious like most prayers were. It was, unmistakably, a test, the same way everything she did was. If you're truly listening, she thought, calm and measured, then you already know what I'm about to ask. Tell me something only the real eternal flame could know. I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she was still thinking 3 steps ahead, still testing, still refusing to take anything at face value. The thing was, I didn't actually know anything about the real eternal flame, whatever that had been before I arrived. I was a dead hunter wearing a god statue like a coat. But I knew something else, something I'd learned through dream resonance just last night. Something that connected directly to what Velmor was about to ask her for. I know about the marks on the map, I said. Someone has been planning something across this empire for a long time, province by province, and Caressavone has been dreaming about it for 3 years. Theris's prayer went completely silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that felt like the sound of someone's entire worldview quietly rearranging itself from scratch. How could you possibly know that? She finally thought. And for the first time, her carefully measured calm cracked just slightly, just enough for shock to slip through. I don't know everything, I admitted, but I know enough to know it matters. Velmor will come to you soon, asking about sealed records. When he does, help him, please. I'd never said please to anyone since arriving in this body. It felt strange, the word carrying weight it never had back when I was just Ren, the guy nobody listened to. You said please, Theris noted, and I felt something in her prayer shift, the calculation easing, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of trust. Most gods don't ask, she continued. They command, or they stay silent. You're doing neither one, and that's the strangest thing about you so far. I'm not most gods, I said, the most honest thing I'd said since waking up in the statue, and probably the understatement of 2 entire lifetimes combined. No, Theris agreed slowly. I don't think you are. Whatever you are, I'll help. Not because you're a god, but because Corrin has heat now, and 3 days ago I should have been dead. I felt something settle between us in that moment, not quite devotion, not quite political calculation, something closer to an actual alliance, the first since arriving here. There's a man in Vone's dreams, I said. Sharp features, cold eyes, marking locations on a map of the Empire one by one. He knew I was watching last night, somehow. He said, they're still listening, especially now, I continued. Theris's prayer carried a chill I felt clearly, even through the strange distance of the connection itself. That's not a metaphor someone uses by accident, she said. It implies he's used to being watched and has already built in countermeasures for being discovered eventually. Which means whatever he's planning, I said slowly, working through it as I spoke, he's planned it long enough that discovery itself doesn't change his timeline much. And if Vone retired 3 years ago under classified circumstances and started these dreams around the same time, Theris added, whatever she was involved in might be the first thread of this whole pattern. I felt the shape of something enormous forming at the edges of my awareness. The way you sense a storm before seeing it, just a change in pressure that wasn't there before. A week ago, I'd been worried about an empire stumbling into a war because nobody bothered asking their god a single question about anything at all. Now it looked like that war might genuinely be the least dangerous thing waiting on the horizon for any of us, which was somehow worse. While I waited for Theris to arrange her meeting with Vone, I decided to use the 2 days for something else entirely, something I'd been putting off since the council chamber. The system had given me a passive ability called dream resonance almost as an afterthought, but it had also hinted, quietly, that possession itself worked on more than just bodies. Possession requires a vessel. Vessel requires belief. That line had stuck with me since the moment I died, and I still didn't fully understand what it actually meant in practice. I'd possessed a god, or the idea of one, but the system's wording suggested that wasn't necessarily the limit, that vessel might be a much broader category than I'd assumed. So that night, instead of drifting through dreams, I tried something different. I focused inward, toward the golden statue itself, toward the threads connecting it to every shrine in the Empire. And I asked the system, directly, the kind of question I hadn't thought to ask before. What else counts as a vessel? What else can belief turn into something I can reach? The response took longer than usual, long enough that I started to wonder if the question itself had broken something, before text finally appeared, slower than before. Vessel candidates detected religious doctrine, active, cultural symbols, dormant, institutional authority, dormant, collective memory, locked. I sat with that for a long moment, turning each phrase over. Religious doctrine, active, meaning the eternal flame itself. But cultural symbols, institutional authority, collective memory. Well, what does dormant mean in this context? I asked, and the system answered almost immediately this time, like it had been waiting for exactly this follow-up question. Dormant vessels require sufficient devotion overflow from active vessel before activation becomes possible. Current overflow, insufficient. In other words, I needed more devotion, more belief, flowing through the eternal flame, before I could even attempt to reach toward these other things. Korin province had helped, but apparently not enough yet. I thought about institutional authority specifically, turning it over. The council, the clergy hierarchy, the structures of governance that ran through every level of the empire. If devotion overflow could eventually let me touch something like that, even partially, the implications were enormous, far beyond anything I'd considered up to this point. I filed it away, the way I'd filed away Korin province and Caressavone's dreams, another thread in a growing tapestry I was only just beginning to see the shape of. The next morning, something unexpected happened. I felt a new prayer form, not from Velmor, not from Theris, not from anyone I recognized, but from someone whose prayer carried an unusual quality. It wasn't desperate, like the old woman's had been. It wasn't a test, like Theris's. It was curious, almost playful, the prayer of someone who didn't actually expect an answer, but was enjoying the act of asking anyway. "Hey," the voice said, mentally, in a tone that felt strikingly informal for someone praying to an empire's primary deity. "If you're actually up there, I've got a question for you." The system supplied a name immediately. Subject: Joran Vask, street performer, Capital Outer Markets. Belief level: low. Prayer frequency: high. A street performer with low belief, but frequent prayers. That combination intrigued me enough that I focused on him properly, curious despite myself about where this was going. Everyone's been talking about some kind of miracle in Korin, Joran thought, still in that same casual conversational tone. Healed kid, corrupt governor arrested, the whole thing. "My question is," he continued, "if you're real and you're actually doing stuff now, does that mean you'll help a guy whose juggling act keeps getting rained on 3 days running?" I almost laughed. Out of everything that had happened this week, the council, the corrupt governor, a man marking maps in someone's dreams, this might be the most normal request I'd gotten yet. "I can't control the weather," I said, deciding to actually respond, mostly because something about Joran's prayer felt refreshingly uncomplicated after everything else. "Damn," Joran thought, sounding genuinely disappointed, but not particularly surprised. "Worth a shot, though. You're really up there, huh? That's wild. Anyway, thanks for replying, I guess." "Ashu, why do you pray if you don't really believe?" I asked, genuinely curious, since the system had flagged his belief level as low despite frequent prayers. "Habit, mostly," Joran said. "My grandmother used to drag me to temple every week when I was a kid. Stopped believing ages ago, but the habit stuck around longer than the faith did, you know?" That answer landed somewhere unexpected. Habit outlasting belief. I thought about all those small, casual prayers I'd brushed past during dream resonance, the ones that felt like background noise. How many of those were like Joran's? People going through motions their grandparents taught them, not because they believed, but because the shape of the ritual had outlived the meaning behind it. "For what it's worth," I said, "the fact that you kept asking even after you stopped believing means something. Habits like that don't come from nothing." "Huh," Joran thought, and I felt something shift slightly in his prayer. Nothing dramatic, but small and genuine. Never thought about it that way before. Thanks, I guess. Still raining, though. I felt the connection ease closed, casual as it had opened, and the system logged it with a small, almost amused feeling notification. Faith spike, minimal. Devotion, 2%. Note, habitual prayer reinforced. 2% from a street performer complaining about rain. It wasn't Korin province, it wasn't the council chamber, but it felt like something, a small thread woven into the larger pattern almost without my noticing. That evening, Velmor's prayer carried something new, a kind of cautious excitement I hadn't heard from him before, the excitement of a man who'd just learned something he wasn't sure how to process yet. "My lord," he said, "word of Korin has spread faster than I expected. 3 other provincial temples have sent inquiries, asking if the flame might have similar concerns about their own governors." I felt something settle in my chest, or whatever served as one. This was the ripple effect I'd hoped for, but faster and bigger than I'd anticipated this early in the process. "What do you want me to tell them?" Velmor asked, and I could feel the weight of the question, the understanding that whatever I said next would shape how this entire thing unfolded going forward. I thought about it carefully. Korin had been 1 province, 1 governor, 11 years of documented theft. 3 more inquiries meant 3 more places. This could go very wrong. "Tell them the flame is listening," I said slowly, "but tell them this isn't about hunting down every governor in the empire. It's about making sure that people who are supposed to be protected actually are. And if those investigations turn up nothing," Velmor asked, If a governor is simply a governor with nothing to hide, then nothing happens to them, I said. This isn't a purge, Velmore. I'm not interested in fear. I'm interested in the kids and Corin sleeping warm, and that's it. Full stop. I felt something in Velmore's prayer settle, a kind of relief, like he'd worried I might say something turning this into the fear-based control he'd quietly resented for decades. Understood, my lord, he said. I'll have Pike and 2 other auditors begin discreet reviews. Quietly, the way we did with Corin. No accusations until there's evidence. Good, I said. And Velmore, one more thing. If any of these investigations find something, and the local priest is anything like Halden, someone who's been quietly suffering and asking for help for years, I'll make sure they're heard, Velmore finished, and I felt something warm in his prayer, the kind of warmth that comes from a man finally getting to use decades of accumulated frustration for something good. That night I returned to dream resonance, but carefully, deliberately avoiding Vone's dreams. I wasn't ready for another encounter with the Map Man yet, not without more information. Instead, I drifted through the dreams of the 3 provinces that had sent inquiries, getting a feel for the shape of things before Pike and the other auditors even arrived. Most of what I found was ordinary. Anxious dreams about harvests, dreams about family members, the small, private worries of people who had no idea their god was quietly window shopping their subconscious. But in one province, in the dream of a young clerk working in a provincial records office, I found something that made me pause. The clerk was dreaming about numbers, endless columns of numbers, the kind of dream that comes from staring at ledgers all day until they start following you to sleep. But one column kept repeating, the same figure appearing again across different pages, like the dream was trying to draw attention to a pattern the clerk hadn't consciously noticed. I focused on the number. It was small, easy to miss, the kind of discrepancy that wouldn't raise alarms on its own, but the system, sensing my attention, supplied something unexpected. Pattern detected. Recurring discrepancy matches Corin Province ledger format. Possible connection. Same source. The same source. Whatever had been happening in Corin Province wasn't necessarily isolated. Whoever or whatever had been quietly skimming funds for 11 years might have left fingerprints elsewhere, too. I felt that storm on the horizon feeling again, the same pressure from when Theris and I first pieced together clues about the man on the map, days earlier. 2 separate threads, Marrow's corruption and this new discrepancy, might not actually be separate at all. Just different fingerprints from the same hand. The next morning I brought this to Velmore immediately, before his usual prayer even fully formed, the urgency in my voice apparently startling him slightly. My lord, he said, surprised. I wasn't expecting you so early this morning. Is something wrong? Did something happen overnight? The discrepancy pattern in Corin's records, I said. Have Pike check if it exists in any of the 3 provinces that sent inquiries. Look for ledgers that don't quite add up the same way. That's remarkably specific, Velmore said slowly. May I ask how you know to look for something this precise, my lord? I hesitated. Explaining dream resonance to Velmore felt like a different category of revelation than everything else so far. More invasive, somehow, even though I hadn't actually done anything wrong by looking. I see things, sometimes, I said carefully. Through people's dreams. I don't go looking for anything personal, but sometimes patterns show up that people haven't consciously noticed yet. There was a pause, and I felt Velmore processing this, weighing it the way he weighed everything now, carefully, like trying to understand something larger than himself. That's an extraordinary gift, he finally said, and an extraordinary responsibility. I won't ask which dreams, my lord, but I'm glad you're the one who has it. Something about that settled a small worry I hadn't fully acknowledged, even to myself, that this power's sheer intimacy might eventually feel like an intrusion. Thank you, I said simply, and felt Velmore's prayer carry a quiet kind of trust forward, the kind that doesn't need grand gestures, just consistency over time. I'll have Pike check immediately, he said. If the pattern matches, we may be looking at something larger than a single corrupt governor after all, my lord. I think we already are, I said quietly. I just don't know how large this actually is yet, or how far it reaches. That evening, as promised, Theris's prayer formed again, sharp and focused as always, but carrying something new underneath, a kind of careful excitement she was clearly trying to keep contained. I spoke with Vone, she said. It took some convincing, but she's agreed to meet, tomorrow night, at a safe house outside the capital. She insisted it be somewhere with no records, no witnesses, nothing traceable. Is she that afraid? I asked, and felt Theris's prayer carry something heavy in response, the weight of someone who'd just spent hours with a person clearly carrying years of accumulated fear. She's terrified, Theris said simply. Not of me, of whoever's in those dreams. She kept saying the same thing over and over. He knows when people talk about him. He always knows. I felt that cold settle through me again, the same feeling from the dream itself, the man turning to look directly at me, saying they're still listening, especially now. Did she say anything else? I asked. Anything at all about who he actually is, or what he might want from any of this? Only one thing, Thera said. She called him the Architect. Not a name, a title. Like whatever he's planning, he sees himself as building something, not destroying it. The Architect. I sat with that title for a long moment, turning it over. Someone who saw a conspiracy not as an attack, but as construction. As if the marks on that map weren't targets at all, but blueprints. Pieces of something he was slowly, patiently building across the whole empire. Tomorrow night, I said slowly. I'll be there. Through you, if that's all right. I want to hear this directly, not secondhand. I assumed as much, Thera said, and I felt something that might have been the faint edge of a smile in her prayer. The first genuinely warm thing I'd felt from her since this all began. Get some rest, she added, then seemed to catch herself. Or whatever the equivalent is for you. Tomorrow might be a long night for both of us. I felt her prayer close, and the temple settled into its evening quiet, candles flickering. Velmore's own prayers winding down for the night somewhere in the distance. 2 provinces' worth of investigations were underway. A street performer was still annoyed about the rain. Korin Province slept warm, and somewhere outside the capital a terrified woman was about to finally speak. Korin Province slept warm for the second night running. Halden's prayers had grown lighter, less bitter, the cautious beginnings of a faith he'd given up on years before. And somewhere in the capital, Caressa Vone slept too, the meeting 2 days away still, and I hesitated before reaching toward her dream again, unsure what I might find. But hesitation, I was starting to realize, wasn't really an option anymore. Not with a man out there marking an empire on a map, patient, methodical, and already aware of me. If he knew about me, even a little, then whatever this was had started long before I ever woke up inside this statue. And that meant I was already behind from the start. If you were Ren right now, with a corrupt governor down, an unexpected ally in Lady Theris, and a mysterious figure who already knows you're watching through someone's dreams, how worried would you actually be? Let me know what you think this man on the map is really planning down in the comments, and stick around. The 2 days passed slower than I expected. The way important things always seem to, time stretching thin right when you need more of it the most. The safe house. Theris had arranged sat just outside the capital, a converted farmhouse with no temple, no shrine, nothing for me to anchor to directly, which meant the only way I could be there at all was through Theris herself, riding along behind her eyes the way I had with Halden, borrowed and quiet. She knelt briefly before leaving her residence, a short private prayer, just enough to open the channel and let me settle into place behind her senses. Ready? She thought, and I felt the faint amusement underneath it, the dry humor of someone about to introduce her god to a terrified intelligence officer. As I'll ever be, I said, which felt like an understatement since I genuinely had no idea what I was about to walk into, metaphorically speaking. The carriage ride was quiet. Theris's mind mostly occupied with logistics. Who else might be watching? What cover story she'd use if anyone asked questions. Through her eyes, the city slid past in darkness, golden domes catching moonlight, the same streets I'd been watching over for the past week from above. It felt strange, seeing it from ground level for once, the scale of everything different, more immediate, more real in a way the bird's eye view never quite captured. The farmhouse, when they arrived, looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. Abandoned, unremarkable, the kind of place nobody would think twice about. A single candle burned in the front window, the agreed signal, and Theris's pulse quickened slightly as she approached, the only outward sign of her own nerves. Inside, a woman sat at a worn wooden table, hands wrapped around a cup of something that had long since gone cold, untouched, just something to hold on to. Caressa Vone looked younger than I'd expected from her dreams, mid-30s, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of years without proper sleep at all. "You came," Caressa said, voice flat, not quite relief, not quite fear, just the exhausted acknowledgement of someone who'd run out of other options entirely. "I told you I would," Theris said, settling into the chair across from her. "And I brought someone else, though you won't be able to see him directly." Caressa's eyes flicked toward the empty space beside Theris, and I felt something in her, tense. An old instinct, the kind soldiers develop when something's in the room. "The flame," Caressa said slowly, not a question, more like she was testing the words in her own mouth, seeing if they still made sense after 3 years. "I know about the marks on the map," I said, through Theris, the words forming themselves the same way they had every time I'd spoken through someone else. Caressa's hands tightened around the cup, knuckles going white, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all, just stared at the space where my voice had come from. 3 years, she finally said, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years I've had that dream, and I never told anyone because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. What would happen? Theris asked gently, and I felt her lean forward slightly, the careful posture of someone trying not to spook a wounded animal. I'd disappear, Caressa said simply. Like everyone else who's gotten too close to whatever this is. Quietly, no investigation, just gone, like I never existed at all. Tell us from the beginning, I said. Whatever you can. We're not going anywhere, and nobody outside this room knows we're here. Caressa took a long breath, the kind that comes before someone finally says something they've been carrying alone for far too long, something that's grown heavier with every passing year. 3 years ago, I was part of a small intelligence unit, she began. Officially, we monitored cross-border smuggling routes. Unofficially, we tracked something else. What kind of something else? Theris asked, and I felt her own intelligence background sharpening her attention, old instincts waking up after years of council politics. Disappearances, Caressa said. Not the obvious kind, not murders, not kidnappings. People who simply stopped existing on paper. Records altered, histories rewritten. Rewritten how? I asked, genuinely confused, since rewriting history sounded more like something from an old story than an actual intelligence concern. Birth records changed, family trees adjusted, sometimes entire branches of a family just removed, like they'd never been born, with everyone else's memories somehow adjusting to match. I felt something cold settle through me, the same cold from the dream, the man saying, "They're still listening, especially now," like he'd been doing this for a very long time. How is that even possible? Theris asked, and I could hear the skepticism in her thought, the instinct of someone trained to assume mundane explanations first. That's what we were trying to find out, Caressa said. We tracked the pattern across 6 provinces over 2 years. Always small, always quiet. Always families nobody would notice missing. And then, I prompted, sensing there was more, the way her prayer 3 nights ago had carried so much more weight than just a simple nightmare. And then we found him, Caressa said, and her voice dropped even further, almost to nothing, like even saying the words out loud carried risk. Or, he found us. The architect, I said quietly, and felt Caressa flinch visibly, her whole body tensing at the title, like hearing it spoken aloud made it more real somehow. You know that name, she said, not quite a question. Fear and something like relief warring in her voice at the same time, like confirmation was both terrifying and a comfort. I've heard it, I said carefully. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he wants. That's why we're here, Caressa. We need to know what you know. Caressa was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her cold cup. And when she spoke again, her voice had changed, steadier like she'd crossed some internal threshold. His real name, the one we found in old records before they got altered too, was Castan Ray. He was a cartographer 3 generations ago, working for the Imperial Survey Office. A cartographer, Theris repeated, and I felt her mind working quickly, connecting dots. That's why he's called the architect. Maps, blueprints. He thinks in terms of structure. It's more than that, Caressa said. Castan Ray discovered something during a survey expedition into the northern wastes, something that was never officially logged anywhere. What kind of something? I asked, and felt my own attention sharpen, the way it had when the system first warned me about anomalous entities in dream resonance. A ruin, Caressa said. Pre-Empire. Older than the Empire, older than the eternal flame itself, according to the fragments we managed to recover before the records vanished. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over. Older than the eternal flame. The system had given me a vessel built on centuries of belief, but apparently this empire's history went back further than that. What was in the ruin? Theris asked, and I felt her voice carry an edge now, the sharp focus of someone who'd spent years dealing with things people weren't supposed to know about. We don't know exactly, Caressa admitted, but whatever it was, it changed Castan Ray. The survey logs describe him as altered after the expedition, though they don't specify how. Altered, I repeated, the word catching on something in the back of my mind, a half-buried fragment of an old story about a soul that survived past its own death, twisted into something else. After that expedition, Caressa continued, Castan Ray began a project. Officially, he was commissioned to create updated maps of the Empire's 6 provinces. Unofficially, he started erasing things, I finished, the pieces clicking together with an unpleasant kind of clarity, the shape of the storm finally becoming visible. Not things, Caressa corrected quietly. People, bloodlines, whole branches of families, methodically removed from records, generation by generation, over more than 100 years. 100 years, Theris said slowly. Caressa, that would mean Castan Ray himself would have to be dead already, wouldn't it? Yes, Caressa said quietly. He died, officially, 93 years ago. Old age, according to the records. But the pattern didn't stop. If anything, it's accelerated over the last decade. I felt the shape of the storm sharpen into something almost recognizable now, the edges of it visible even if the center was still hidden in fog and uncertainty. Someone's continuing his work, I said. Or something is. The man in your dreams? Is he Kasten Rye himself somehow, or someone else entirely carrying on what he started? I don't know, Caress admitted. The dream started after our unit found the survey logs. I think something noticed us looking, and it's been in my head ever since. Why you specifically? Theris asked, and I felt the question land with weight, the obvious next question that none of us had quite wanted to ask yet. Because I was the one who actually read the logs aloud, Caressa said. To the rest of the unit during our final briefing, I was the last voice that spoke his real name out loud before everything fell apart. What happened to the rest of your unit? I asked, already half dreading the answer, the cold certainty of it settling in before she even spoke. Gone, Caressa said simply. All of them. Over the following months, one by one, reassigned, retired, transferred to remote postings. I never heard from any of them again. And the records? Theris asked. The survey logs, the entire pattern you'd tracked over 2 years, all of it just sealed away forever? Sealed, Caressa said. Classified beyond my clearance, the same week our unit was dissolved, I requested access twice afterward. Both requests were denied without explanation. But you kept the dreams, I said quietly, even after everything else was taken away from you, piece by piece over those 3 years. I couldn't stop them, Caressa said, and for the first time, something cracked in her voice. Every night, the same map, the same marks, spreading further each time, never stopping. 3 years of carrying this completely alone, finally showing through in her voice, the exhaustion of it settling over the small farmhouse room like a physical weight. How many marks are there now? I asked, and felt Caressa's hand tighten around the cold cup again, the question clearly one she'd been dreading. All 6 provinces, she said. Every single one. The marks used to be scattered, isolated points. Now they're connected, lines between them, like a structure being completed. A structure for what? Theris asked, and I felt the shape of the storm sharpen further, the edges becoming almost clear now, though the center remained stubbornly hidden. I don't know, Caressa said, but 3 nights ago, for the first time in 3 years, the dream changed. He looked at me. He's never done that before, and he said something was listening. Me, I said quietly, the realization settling cold and certain. He meant me. He was looking directly at me through her dream. I think so, Caressa said. And I think that means whatever's been quietly happening for the last 100 years just stopped being quiet because something noticed it for the first time. I felt the weight of that settle over the room, over Theris's mind, over Caressa's exhausted, relieved, terrified expression, 3 years of isolation finally breaking open. Corin Province, I said slowly, a new thought forming. Caressa, when you tracked this pattern 3 years ago, was Corin one of the provinces involved? Caressa's eyes widened slightly and she sat up straighter, old instincts visibly reactivating. Yes, Corin was one of the earliest. Why? What happened in Corin? We just dealt with a corrupt governor there, Theris said slowly, putting the pieces together at the same speed I was. 11 years of stolen temple funds, falsified records. That's the pattern, Caressa said, and I felt something like horror dawning in her thoughts. That's exactly the pattern. Funds redirected, falsified records, paper trails that don't add up. We thought it was corruption, she continued. What if it was never just corruption at all? What if it was always something else and corruption was just the cover for it? What if Marrow wasn't acting alone, I said slowly, or wasn't even the real target? What if Marrow was a symptom and the actual goal was something else entirely, hidden underneath the theft? The discrepancy pattern Pike found in the other 3 provinces, I continued, mostly thinking aloud now. What if that's not separate corruption either? What if it's all the same structure? The architect's structure, Theris said quietly, and I felt a chill pass through her that had nothing to do with the cold farmhouse air around them. If that's true, Caressa said, then whatever's being built isn't just in Corin. It's across the entire empire, hidden inside what everyone assumed was just normal greed and corruption. And nobody would look twice, I said, because corrupt governors are common enough that nobody connects the dots. It's the perfect cover. Hide a 100-year project inside 100 small, boring crimes. The room fell silent for a long moment, the weight of it settling over all 3 of us, the candle in the window flickering slightly as a draft moved through the old farmhouse. What do we do now? Caressa asked finally, and I heard something in her voice that hadn't been there before, not just fear anymore, but the faint, fragile beginning of purpose. We need to map it, I said. Every province where this pattern exists, every discrepancy, every falsified record, every quiet theft that might actually be part of something larger. That's a massive undertaking, Thera said. Even with Pike and the other auditors, mapping something this scale would take months, maybe years, and that's assuming the architect doesn't notice. He already noticed, I said. 3 nights ago. Whatever we do now, he already knows something's different. The only question is whether we move faster than whatever he's planning. Or slower, Caressa said quietly, and hope he doesn't realize how close we actually are until it's too late for him to do anything about it. I felt something settle in my awareness, a kind of grim clarity, the same feeling I'd had right before dealing with Marrow, except scaled up to something I genuinely wasn't sure I could handle yet. Caressa, I said, I want you working with Pike and the others, not officially, not where anyone can connect you back to your old unit, but your knowledge of the pattern, what to look for, that's invaluable. You want me back in this? Caressa said, and I felt something complicated in her thoughts, fear and relief and something almost like hope, tangled together after 3 years of isolation. I want you safe, I said, and I think the safest place for you now is working on this, not hiding from it. The architect already knows about the dreams. Hiding hasn't protected you. Maybe doing something will. Caressa was quiet for a long moment, and then slowly she nodded, the first decisive movement I'd seen from her since they'd arrived. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm in. God, I haven't said that in 3 years. Felt good, actually, even with everything else. There's one more thing, I said, and felt both women's attention sharpen. The particular quality of attention that comes when someone says one more thing after already delivering enormous news. The ruin, I said. The one Caston Rye found before all of this started. If we're dealing with something that started there, something that altered him, we need to know what it actually was. That ruin is in the northern wastes, Caressa said. Beyond the Empire's borders, technically. Unmapped, unclaimed, nobody's jurisdiction. Which is probably why nobody's looked at it properly in 90 years. Could you find it again? I asked. Not go there yourself, necessarily, but the location, coordinates, anything from the old survey logs you might remember. I memorized everything, Caressa said. Before the records vanished, I read through them dozens of times. I could probably reconstruct most of the route, even now. And that's our next step, I said. While Pike and the others work on mapping the pattern across the provinces, we need someone who can investigate that ruin carefully, without drawing attention. That's incredibly dangerous, Thera said. The northern wastes aren't called wastes for nothing. And if there's something there that altered a man enough to start a 100-year project... I know, I said, which is why I need someone who can handle themselves out there. Someone strong enough to survive whatever's waiting, and careful enough not to wake it up if it's still sleeping. You have someone in mind, Thera said, not quite a question. The careful tone of someone who already suspected the answer and wasn't entirely happy about it. Not yet, I admitted. But I think I know where to start looking. Somewhere in all those quiet, ordinary dreams I keep brushing past. I felt my awareness drift, almost involuntarily, toward dream resonance, toward the thousands of small dreams scattered across the capital, searching without knowing what for. Most of what I found was the same as always. Anxious dreams, hopeful dreams, the small private worlds people carried with them every night without anyone else ever seeing. But then, near the capital's southern gate, in what felt like a barracks of some kind, I found a dream unlike anything I'd encountered so far. Sharp-edged, controlled, almost too quiet. A woman, dreaming, but not the way most people dreamed. The dream had structure to it, deliberate, like she was running through scenarios even in her sleep, testing outcomes, discarding them, trying again. In the dream, she stood alone in a vast, frozen landscape, facing something enormous and shapeless, made of shadow and cold light, and every single time, no matter what she tried, the dream ended the same way. She lost, but she kept trying. Over and over, the dream resetting, her testing a different approach each time, like someone solving a puzzle that refused to have a solution, refusing to simply accept that. The system supplied a name, and this time, and it came with extra context I hadn't seen before. Subject, Mira Kessler, former Imperial Vanguard 4th rank. Discharged 18 months ago, the system continued. Devotion status, dormant, recently active again after a long gap. Imperial Vanguard, 4th rank. That meant something. Even if I didn't fully understand the Empire's military rankings yet, the system's tone suggesting it was significant. Discharged 18 months ago, I repeated to myself. Why would someone at that rank be discharged, and why would they be having a recurring dream about losing to something made of shadow and cold light? I focused closer, carefully, the way I'd learned to with Caressa, trying not to disturb the dream itself, just observe, just listen to whatever was underneath the surface. And underneath, I found something I hadn't expected. Not fear, exactly, though there was plenty of that. Underneath the fear was guilt, old and heavy, the kind that doesn't fade with time, just settles deeper. The dream shifted, just slightly, and for a moment I saw something that wasn't the frozen landscape. A squad of soldiers, 8 of them standing in formation, Mira at their head. Then the frozen landscape again, the shapeless cold thing. And this time, when Mira lost, I saw why the dream always ended the same way. Behind her, the 8 soldiers, frozen, motionless, already gone. She wasn't just dreaming about losing a fight. She was dreaming about having already lost something, replaying it, trying to find the version where it goes differently, where they don't disappear. They're gone, I heard her think. The words bleeding through from somewhere beneath the dream's surface, raw and exhausted. Every time, no matter what I do, they're already gone before I even start. I pulled back slightly, giving myself space to think. 8 soldiers, gone. A dream about shadow and cold light, 18 months of carried guilt. Theris, I said, I think I found someone, but I need information first. 18 months ago, was there an incident involving a vanguard squad? Something resulting in multiple deaths or disappearances, I continued. Near the northern border, around the same time these dreams of hers seemed to have started. I felt Theris's prayer sharpen with the particular focus she brought to anything resembling an actual investigation, the gears of her mind audibly shifting into motion. 18 months ago, she said slowly, there was an incident in the northern border region. Officially, an entire vanguard squad was lost to what was reported as a rock slide during a routine patrol. Officially, I repeated, catching the heavy emphasis underneath her thought, the weight of a word doing a lot of quiet work. The squad leader survived, Theris continued. Discharged shortly after, on medical grounds. There were questions at the time about the report, but nothing ever came of those questions, she added. The investigation closed quickly, faster than these things usually do. Closed by whom? I asked, already feeling that familiar cold settling through me again, the now recognizable shape of something larger, hiding behind something small. I'd need to check, Theris said. But Ren, the northern border region, 18 months ago, that's close to the northern wastes, closer than almost anywhere else in the Empire. I sat with that, the pieces sliding together with an almost physical sensation, like watching a key fit into a lock you hadn't even realized was there. A rock slide that wasn't a rock slide, I said slowly, near the northern wastes, 18 months ago. And she's been dreaming about it ever since. You think she actually saw something out there? Theris said. Something real. And the official report buried it, the same way everything else around this seems to get buried? I think, I said carefully, that Mira Kessler might be exactly who we need for the Ruin expedition. Not despite what happened to her squad, but because of it. She's already seen whatever's out there, I continued, even if she doesn't fully understand what she saw or why the official story buried it so fast. And she's been carrying guilt about it for 18 months, Theris said, with no outlet, no closure, nobody believing the official story was wrong. If we approach her, I said slowly, we'd be offering her something she hasn't had in a year and a half, a chance to actually understand what happened to her squad, and maybe, somehow, to do something about it. That's either exactly the right approach, Theris said, or it's incredibly manipulative, using someone's grief to recruit them for a dangerous mission. I want to make sure we're doing the first one. I appreciated that about Theris, the way she kept circling back to that question, the line between using people and helping them, never quite letting either of us forget it mattered. We tell her everything, I said. The pattern, the architect, the ruin, all of it. If she says no, we respect that, and we still help her get real answers about what happened to her squad, regardless. That's fair, Theris said. I can arrange contact. She's been living quietly in the capital since her discharge, taking odd work, the kind of work that doesn't ask too many questions about military records. One more thing, I said. Her devotion was flagged as dormant, recently active. She's been praying again, after presumably not praying for a while. Do you know why that might be? I don't, Theris admitted. But given everything else, I'd guess it's connected to whatever's been happening lately. Word of Corin Province has spread. Maybe she heard it, and it stirred something. Maybe, I said. Or maybe the same thing reaching out through Caressa's dreams has been reaching toward her too, in its own way, all along. That thought settled uncomfortably between us, the carriage rattling on through streets that were slowly waking up around it, vendors calling out, the first hints of normal life beginning. I'll arrange it for tomorrow, Theris said. Today, really, given how close to dawn it is. We've been at this all night already. And there's still the matter of finding whoever's been controlling archive access for 30 years, she added, which honestly might take longer than this. One thing at a time, I said, though even as I said it, I felt the weight of how many things were now happening at once, threads multiplying faster than I could keep track of them all. Pike and the auditors, working through provincial records. Caressa, rejoining the investigation she'd been forced out of 3 years ago. Theris, hunting for a senior clergy member with decades of quiet archive authority. and now possibly Mira Kessler, carrying 18 months of unresolved grief. A week ago, I'd been a golden statue listening to an old woman pray for her sick son. Now I had an entire intelligence network, built almost by accident, built out of people who simply needed someone to actually listen to them for once, after years or decades of nobody ever bothering. "You're quiet," Theris observed, and I felt the careful warmth in it. Not pressing, just gently noting the shift in my attention. "Just thinking," I said, "about how all of this started. An old woman praying for her son. That's it. That's the whole reason any of this exists. One small prayer answered." "And now you've got half the Empire's hidden problems landing on your doorstep," Theris said, "because word got out that someone was finally listening." "I keep thinking about that," I said. "How much was always there, just waiting, hoping someone would notice? Corin, Caressa, Mira, Halden. How many more people are out there right now," I continued, praying about something, not really expecting an answer, the same way Joran wasn't expecting one about the rain? "More than you can help individually," Theris said, not unkindly, just honestly. "That's the part you'll need to come to terms with, Ren. You can't fix everything, not even with all of this." "I know," I said, "but I can fix some things, and I think maybe fixing some things is enough to start. The rest follows from that, the way Corin followed from one healed kid." "That's a very particular kind of optimism," Theris said, "for someone who just spent the night learning about a 100-year conspiracy and a possibly compromised cardinal." "He's not compromised," I said. "Just used without knowing it. Maybe that's the most optimistic thing about tonight, honestly." "If someone can be used for 30 years without realizing it," I added, "maybe they can also be unused the moment they actually know." I felt something in Theris's prayer that might have been agreement, or might have just been tired respect, the kind that comes after a long night when everyone's too exhausted for anything more elaborate. And then, almost as an afterthought, the system pinged, quiet and almost gentle, like it had been waiting for exactly this moment to offer something it had been holding back. "Devotion network threshold reached. Dormant vessel candidate, institutional authority, now available for partial activation." I froze, or whatever the equivalent was for something without a body. Institutional authority? The thing the system had mentioned days ago, the one I'd filed away alongside everything else. "What does partial activation mean?" I asked, and the system responded immediately, like it had been ready for this question for a while now. "Host may influence decisions of individuals holding formal authority within the devotion network if they're actively praying and devotion exceeds baseline." I sat with that, the implications spreading out slowly like ripples from a stone dropped into still water, each ring wider than the last and harder to predict. Velmore? Theris? Pike? Soon, possibly, governors and magistrates, anyone in the Empire structure whose devotion had grown sincere enough to open this kind of channel. "That's an enormous amount of power," I said slowly, mostly to myself, though I felt Theris's attention sharpen slightly, like she'd caught some shift in the quality of the silence. "Are you all right?" she asked. And I realized I'd been quiet for longer than I meant to be, lost in the weight of what the system had just handed me. "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking about how much responsibility keeps landing on me faster than I expected, and how easy it would be to use it badly without even meaning to." "That's probably a good sign," Theris said. And I felt something warm in her thought, the first time she'd said something to me that felt less like strategy and more like genuine reassurance. "What do you mean by that exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious now, despite everything else weighing on my mind at the moment. "The people who worry about misusing power," Theris said, "are usually the ones least likely to actually do it. It's the ones who never stop to think about it that you have to watch." I thought about Marrow, about 11 years of quiet theft from people who trusted him, about a man who probably never once stopped to consider the weight of what he was doing to an entire province. "I hope you're right," I said quietly, holding on to that thought as the carriage of my own awareness kept turning everything else over. "So do I," Theris said quietly, "because if even half of what Caressa just told us is true, you're going to need every bit of that power before this is over, and probably soon." Caressa, who'd been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke again, her voice steadier now than it had been at any point since they'd arrived at the farmhouse. "There's something else," she said. "Something I haven't told anyone, not even in the reports we filed before everything got sealed." "What is it?" I asked, feeling that storm on the horizon sensation again, the now familiar weight of something important about to surface. "The ruin," Caressa said. "It's not actually empty. Our survey team found something there, something they brought back, before everyone realized what it actually was." "Brought back what?" Theris asked, and I felt her posture shift, leaning forward slightly, old instincts fully awake now. "A fragment," Caressa said. "Stone, about the size of a fist, covered in markings that matched no known language, ancient or modern, anywhere in the Empire. The survey team cataloged it as an artifact and shipped it back to the capital for study, before anyone fully understood what they had actually found. "Where is it now?" I asked, already feeling a strange, unplaceable certainty that whatever the answer was, it would matter enormously. "That's the thing," Caressa said. "Officially, it was logged into the Imperial Archives restricted collection, but when our unit tried to access it 3 years ago, the records showed it had already been checked out." "Checked out by whom?" Theris asked, and I felt the question land with a weight that told me she already suspected the answer wasn't going to be reassuring. "That's the part that made us stop investigating," Caressa said quietly. "The checkout record was signed by Cardinal Velmor." I felt something cold and sharp settle through me, a feeling unlike anything I'd experienced since waking up in this golden statue, sharper even than the unease from the dream. "Velmor," I repeated, the name feeling strange in a way it never had before, like a word you've said 1,000 times, suddenly sounding foreign. 3 years ago," Caressa said, "around the same time our unit was dissolved. Around the same time the dream started. I don't know if it's connected, but..." "It's connected," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Everything in this seems to be connected. I just don't understand how yet." Velmor, the man I'd trusted completely for the past week, the one who dropped to his knees that first night, who personally oversaw a sick child's recovery, the same man who'd coordinated the entire investigation that brought down Marrow, every step of it, start to finish, exactly as I'd asked him to. The man who, according to a sealed record 3 years old, had personally checked out an artifact from a ruin that altered someone enough to start this whole project. "I need to think about this," I said slowly, carefully, before I do anything, before I say anything to him. "If there's an explanation, I want to find it, but if there isn't, then you've been trusting the wrong person for a week," Theris finished quietly, "and he's had a week's worth of access to everything you've been doing." The candle in the farmhouse window flickered low, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table, across Caressa's exhausted face, across the careful stillness of Theris's expression. 3 years of silence, broken in one night. A pattern across 6 provinces, finally visible. A ruin in the northern wastes, waiting, patient, exactly like the man on the map. And now somehow, impossibly, a question mark hanging over the one person I'd trusted most since waking up in this strange, golden existence a week ago. "We should go," Theris said quietly, "before it gets too late. Caressa, are you safe here for tonight? I can arrange for someone to bring you to the capital tomorrow, quietly." "I'll be fine," Caressa said, and for the first time, I felt something like genuine steadiness in her thought. The steadiness of someone who'd finally put down a weight she'd been carrying alone far too long. "Thank you," she added, and I felt the words directed at both of us, at Theris, and at the strange, distant presence she could feel but not see. "For listening, for finally listening. Thank you for talking," I said. "For 3 years of carrying this alone and still finding the courage to say it out loud when it mattered." Theris rose, and I felt the farmhouse fall away as she stepped back outside into the cool night air. The carriage waiting, the long ride back to the capital ahead of them. "What are you going to do?" Theris asked once they were moving again, her thought quiet, careful. The question of someone who understood exactly how complicated this had just become. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I need to see Velmor again, talk to him, watch him, see if anything feels different now that I know to look for it." "And if it does feel different somehow?" Theris asked, watching the dark road ahead with the careful patience of someone used to waiting for answers. "Then I'll deal with it," I said. "Carefully, the same way I've dealt with everything else so far. But, Theris, I need you to understand something important." "What is it?" she asked, her thought quiet, attentive. The careful focus of someone who'd learned to take my pauses seriously by now. "If Velmor is somehow connected to this, to the architect, to whatever's been happening for 100 years, I said slowly, "it doesn't necessarily mean he's an enemy. People get pulled into things. People get used. I learned that the hard way in my old life, more times than I'd like to admit, honestly." "You're hoping there's an innocent explanation somewhere in all of this," Theris said, not unkindly, just calmly observing the shape of my own hope. "I'm hoping," I admitted, "but I'm not assuming. There's a difference, and I think that difference might matter a lot over the next few days." The carriage rattled on through the dark, the capital's golden domes growing closer on the horizon, catching the first faint hints of approaching dawn. I sat with the question for a while, turning it over the way I'd learned to turn things over this past week, slowly, carefully, trying not to jump to the first answer that felt satisfying. Velmor had checked out an artifact 3 years ago. That was a fact, sitting there in a sealed record, cold and undeniable, no matter how much I wanted to find another explanation. But facts, I was learning, didn't always mean what they seemed to mean on the surface, and 3 years was a long time for context to get lost along the way. "Theris," I said slowly, "before we get back, I want to try something. I want to look at Velmor's dreams tonight, the way I looked at Caressa's. I felt Theris's prayer sharpen with surprise. Is that wise? If he's connected to this, and your power can be sensed somehow, the way the architect sensed you in Caressa's dream. I know, I said, but I'd rather know now, carefully, than wait and let this sit between us unspoken. If something's wrong, I need to see it before I decide anything. And if he notices you? Theris asked, the question carrying real weight, the kind that comes from someone who'd spent years thinking about exactly this sort of risk. Then he notices, I said. But Theris, think about it. If Velmor really is part of this, after everything we've done this week, wouldn't he have already acted against us, somehow? I felt Theris consider that, the careful, methodical turning over of a problem that I was coming to recognize as one of her defining qualities, the thing that made her so good at this. That's true, she admitted slowly. If he wanted to stop the Corrin investigation or the other 3 provincial reviews, he had a dozen opportunities. He didn't take any of them. Which means either he's not connected at all, I said, or he's connected in a way that doesn't conflict with what we're doing. Either way, I need to know which. The carriage continued through the quiet streets, and I let my awareness drift carefully, the way I'd learned to drift through dream resonance without disturbing whatever I touched. Velmor's mind, when I found it, was different from what I expected. Not guarded, not layered with secrets I'd half feared, just tired, the honest exhaustion of an old man who'd had a long week. He was dreaming about the council chamber, replaying the moment he'd spoken in front of everyone, the moment that had started all of this. Except in the dream, his voice kept failing, the words not coming out right. It was an anxiety dream, plain and simple, the kind anyone might have after the biggest moment of their career. Nothing hidden, nothing sinister, just an old man worried he'd somehow get it wrong if it happened again. I almost pulled back then, satisfied, but something made me linger just a moment longer, the way you might glance back at a room one more time before leaving it for good. And in that extra moment, at the very edge of Velmor's dream, almost like background noise, I caught a fragment of something else. A memory, not a dream exactly, surfacing the way old memories sometimes do during sleep. A younger Velmor, maybe 30 years younger, standing in what looked like an archive, surrounded by shelves of sealed boxes, holding something small and heavy wrapped in cloth. This shouldn't be here, younger Velmor was saying, to someone I couldn't see clearly, voice muffled the way voices get in old memories. This belongs in the deep archive, not general circulation, he continued, his tone carrying the careful worry of someone following orders they didn't fully understand. Then take it there yourself, the other voice said. Sign it out under your authority. Nobody questions the Cardinal's clerk moving restricted items to proper storage. The memory shifted, blurred, the way dreams do, and I caught one more fragment before it faded entirely. Younger. Velmor, alone now, looking down at the cloth-wrapped object in his hands, his expression troubled. I don't like this, he murmured, to no one in that empty archive. Whatever this is, it shouldn't be moving around like this, but it's not my place to question the higher clergy. The memory faded, and I pulled back fully this time, sitting with what I'd just seen, turning it over with a kind of careful relief mixed with something else, something more complicated. I saw something, I told Theris. 30 years ago, give or take, Velmor, much younger, moving a sealed item from one archive to deep storage. He didn't want to. He was told to by someone with more authority. 30 years ago, Theris repeated slowly. That's before the pattern even started accelerating, according to Caressa. Before the dreams. Long before any of this. He checked out the artifact 3 years ago, I said, working through it as I spoke. But what if that's not the first time he's handled something like this? What if Velmor's been quietly moving restricted items his whole career, on someone else's orders, without ever questioning it, because that's just what his job was? A clerk who became cardinal, Theris said slowly, who spent decades doing exactly what he was told, without asking why, because that's how the church works, and because questioning things wasn't his place. Until a week ago, I said, when his God actually started talking to him and gave him permission for the first time in his life to actually think about what he was being asked to do. I felt something settle in my awareness, a piece of the picture sliding into place. Not the whole picture, not yet, but enough to change the shape of what I was looking at. Velmor isn't the architect, I said slowly, and I don't think he even knows what he's been part of. He's been a tool, Theris, for decades, just like everyone else who's quietly disappeared without anyone noticing. But he's still connected, Theris said. Whoever told him to move that artifact 30 years ago is still out there, still using the church's structure. And Velmor doesn't know, I said, which means if I confront him directly, ask him about the artifact, he might not even remember it specifically. It was 30 years ago, one sealed box among hundreds. But he might remember who gave him instructions like that, Theris said. Even without the specific item, that's not a low-level clerk giving such orders. Someone in the senior clergy, I said. Someone who's been there long enough to have that kind of standing authority over archive movements 30 years ago, and probably still does now. That narrows things considerably, Tara said, and I felt something sharpen in her thought. The focus of someone who'd just been handed a genuinely useful lead after hours of uncertainty. How many people in the church hierarchy have held that kind of standing authority for 30-plus years? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be small. Very few, Tara said. Most clergy rotate through positions. 30 years of continuous archive authority would mean someone who's been deliberately kept in place, or who's made sure they stayed there. Find out who, I said, quietly. Don't go through Velmore, not yet. If this person is still active, still connected to whatever's happening, I don't want them knowing we're looking. I can do that, Tara said. It'll take a few days, but archive authority records aren't sealed the way intelligence records are, just obscure, buried under decades of routine paperwork. The carriage finally reached the outskirts of the capital, the first market stalls beginning to stir despite the early hour, vendors setting up for a day that hadn't quite started yet. For what it's worth, I said, I'm relieved. About Velmore, I genuinely didn't want it to be him, after everything this past week. I know, Tara said quietly. For what it's worth, neither did I. He's a good man, even if he spent most of his life not realizing it mattered whether he questioned things or not. He's realizing now, I said quietly. That has to count for something, after a lifetime of just doing what he was told without question. It does, Theris agreed. It's probably the most dangerous thing that's happened to whoever's behind this in a very long time, actually. A tool that starts asking questions. Somewhere in that city, Velmore was probably asleep, or praying, or both, completely unaware that the god he served had just learned something that might change everything between them. Somewhere else, Caressavone was finally sleeping without the weight of 3 years of silence pressing down on her, even if the dreams might still come. And somewhere in the northern wastes, in a ruin nobody had properly investigated in 90 years, something that altered a man into the architect was still there, waiting. Patient, exactly the way the architect himself had been in that dream, exactly the way something that's planned for a century learns to be. I felt the storm I'd sensed building for days finally arrive, not with thunder, but with the quiet, terrible clarity of understanding how little I actually knew and how little time I had left. If you were Wren right now, having cleared Velmore but discovered someone in the senior clergy has been quietly moving restricted artifacts for 30 years or more, what would you do first? Dig into archive authority records yourself, send Pike to investigate quietly, or wait for Theris to identify the person before acting at all? Let me know your theory about who this senior clergy member might actually be, down in the comments, and stick around. 3 days passed before Theris found a name, 3 days that felt longer than the entire week before them combined, every hour stretched thin with waiting. I spent that time the way I'd spent every other quiet moment lately, drifting through dream resonance, watching the Empire's small, ordinary lives continue, unaware of any of this. Corrin Province stayed warm. The street performer Joran got a sunny day finally, and his juggling act apparently went well enough that he prayed a small, genuine thanks afterward. Pike's investigations into the other 3 provinces turned up 2 more discrepancy patterns, smaller than Corrin's, but matching. The same fingerprints, the same careful, patient theft. Mira Kessler agreed to meet Theris on the second day. I listened through Theris's eyes again, and what I saw confirmed everything the dream had shown me, and more. Mira was lean, controlled, the kind of person who'd learned to hold herself perfectly still even when everything inside her wasn't still at all, the discipline of years of training. When Theris explained carefully what we knew, what we suspected, and what we were asking, Mira didn't react the way I expected. She didn't cry, didn't get angry. She just went quiet. You're telling me, she said finally, that what happened to my squad wasn't a rock slide, that something real killed them, and that you want me to go back there. I'm telling you, Theris said carefully, that we think you're the only person who's actually seen whatever's out there and survived, and that it's connected to something larger. And if I say no? Mira asked, and I felt something steady in the question, not defiance, just the careful testing of someone who needed to know all the boundaries first. Then we still help you get real answers about what happened, I said through Theris. That part isn't conditional. You deserve to know the truth, regardless of what you choose? Mira was quiet for a long moment, and I felt something shift in her, the careful stillness cracking just slightly, 18 months of unresolved grief finally finding somewhere to go. They were my responsibility, she said quietly. 8 people. I led them out there, and I came back, and everyone told me it was just bad luck, nothing anyone could have prevented. But you never believed that, I said gently, the words sitting in the air between us with the weight of something true. No, Mira said. I've replayed that day 1,000 times. There was no rock slide. There was something else, something that came out of the ground, made of shadow and cold, and it took them, one by one, while I... She stopped, and I felt the weight of what she wasn't saying, the guilt that had been sitting in her dreams every night for 18 months, replaying, searching for a different ending. While you survived, I finished gently. And you've spent 18 months wondering why and feeling like maybe you shouldn't have, even though that's not how any of this works. Yes, Mira said, barely audible, the single word carrying more weight than entire sentences usually managed. Exactly that. Every single night. Exactly that. I can't tell you why you survived, I said, but I can tell you whatever's out there is connected to something that's been hurting people across this empire for 100 years, quietly. And I can tell you, I continued, that if we don't understand what's out there, more people will disappear, the same way your squad did, and nobody will ever know why, the same way nobody knew about them. Mira's hands, resting calmly on the table, curled slowly into fists, not in anger, but in something closer to resolve, the particular tension of someone making a decision they'd already half made. I'll go, she said. Not because of some grand cause, because if that thing is still out there and connected to whatever's hurting people now, maybe this time I can actually do something. Thank you, I said, and meant it more than almost anything I'd said since waking up in this golden statue a week and a half ago. Don't thank me yet, Mira said, and for the first time, something like a dry, exhausted smile crossed her face. We haven't gone anywhere yet, and going there might be the easy part. That evening, Theris's prayer carried a different kind of weight, sharper, more urgent than the careful patience of the last 3 days, the tone of someone who'd finally found something. I have a name, she said. It took longer than expected because the records were deliberately obscure, scattered across departments, never consolidated, almost like someone wanted it that way. Who is it? I asked, feeling the storm I'd sensed for days finally gathering into something with an actual shape, an actual name attached to it now. Archbishop Selwyn Drask, Theris said. Senior clergy, overseeing the Imperial Archive's restricted collections. He's held that position for 34 years, longer than anyone in recorded history. 34 years, I repeated, and nobody thought that was unusual in all that time, not even once, not anyone. Archive positions aren't glamorous, Theris said. Nobody competes for them. It's the kind of post people get assigned to and forget about, exactly where someone could stay invisible for decades. Tell me about him, I said. Everything you can find. Personality, habits, history, anything at all that might give us a starting point. That's the strange part, Theris said slowly. There's almost nothing. No personal history before he took the position 34 years ago. No family records, no prior postings, nothing. He simply appears in the records, she continued, already in place, like he just arrived fully formed into the role with no past attached to him at all. I felt that cold settle through me again, sharper this time, the same cold from the dream, the same cold from learning Caston Rye had died 93 years ago while his project continued. Theris, I said slowly, what if Archbishop Drask isn't connected to Caston Ray? What if he is Caston Ray? Somehow, the same way the man in Caress's dreams might not be a memory. That's... Theris started, then stopped, the thought clearly landing somewhere uncomfortable. That's not impossible, is it? Not after everything else we've learned this past week. The ruin altered him, I said, working through it as I spoke. What if altered meant something closer to what happened to a remnant soul in stories I half remember from my old life? What if it meant he stopped aging, stopped dying the normal way, I continued, and just kept going? Quietly, for over a century, hidden inside the church's own structure. A man who's been running this for over a century, Theris said, using positions like archive authority to move pieces around because nobody questions a cardinal's clerk or a dusty old archbishop. And now, I said slowly, he knows something's listening. Caress's dream told us that 3 nights before any of this even started moving, before any of us had even met. Which means, Theris said, he's had 3 days to react to everything. The investigations, Corin, all of it. If he's as careful as 100 years of patience suggests, he hasn't done nothing. I felt that thought settle uncomfortably, the weight of it pressing against everything we'd built this past week, every careful, quiet success suddenly feeling fragile and exposed. I need to see him, I said. Through someone. Carefully, hey. I need to know if he's praying, if there's any channel at all, even a small one, anything to work with. That's incredibly risky, Theris said. If he's the architect and already knows something's listening, reaching toward him directly might be exactly what he's waiting for. I know, I said, but we're already behind, Theris. We have been since Caress's dream changed. The only question is whether we stay behind or try to catch up, even if it's dangerous. Theris was quiet for a long moment, weighing this the way she weighed everything, carefully, methodically. But also, I was starting to recognize, with a kind of steady courage. All right, she said finally. But not tonight. Tomorrow, during the Cardinal's Council session. If Drask is praying during a public session, it'll be brief, formal, lower risk for both of us. And if he's not praying at all, I said, that tells us something too, one way or another, about what we're actually dealing with. It does, Theris agreed. Either way, we'll know more tomorrow than tonight. Get some rest, Ren, or whatever the equivalent is. Tomorrow is going to be a long day for all of us. The next day arrived with deceptive ordinariness, the capital waking up exactly as it always did. Vendors, bells, golden morning light on white marble, nothing betraying what was coming. Velmore's morning prayer was steady, unaware, exactly as it had been every morning this week, and I felt a small pang of guilt knowing what I now suspected about the man who'd given him orders 30 years ago. My lord, Velmore said, the Cardinal's Council convenes this afternoon. Routine matters, though Archbishop Drask requested time to discuss the recent provincial investigations specifically. I felt something sharpen in my attention immediately. Drask requested time specifically about the investigations? Did he say why? Yes, my lord, Velmore said. Slight confusion in his prayer at the urgency he could sense but not fully understand. He often comments on administrative matters. It's part of his role. Maybe, I said carefully. Velmore, I need you to do something today, and I need you to trust I have a good reason, even if I can't fully explain it yet. Of course, my lord, Velmore said without hesitation, the same trust he'd given me from the very first night. Before any of this, before he even knew what I was. During the council session, I said, if Archbishop Drask prays even a formal blessing before speaking, I need to know immediately. Watch him more closely than usual. I can do that, my lord, Velmore said. May I ask why you're asking specifically about him? Today of all days? I hesitated, the same way I had with Theris, weighing how much to say, how much Velmore could handle, how much might put him at risk if I was wrong about any of this. I think Archbishop Drask might be connected to something dangerous, I said finally. Something happening quietly for a very long time. I don't have proof yet. That's what today is for. Velmore's prayer carried something complicated, surprise, concern, and underneath it, something I hadn't expected, a kind of grim recognition. A puzzle piece, sliding into place from his side, too. My lord, he said slowly, 30 years ago, when I was younger, I moved an item from the General Archive into deep storage, on instructions I never questioned at the time. I've thought about it sometimes over the years, he continued, though I couldn't say why. It's only now, hearing you say his name, that it feels significant at all to me. I felt something cold and certain settle through me. Whose instructions, Velmore? Whose orders sent you to move that item 30 years ago? Archbishop Drask's, Velmore said. He was newer to the position then, relatively. I was a junior clerk. It seemed unremarkable at the time, completely ordinary. It is significant, I said quietly. Velmore, thank you. For remembering and for telling me, even though you didn't have to say anything at all. My lord, Velmore said, and I felt something steady in his prayer. The steadiness of a man who'd spent a week learning that questioning things, finally, after decades, mattered. If this man has used people like me for that long, without any of us knowing, he continued, then I want to help stop it. Whatever that takes, my lord, I'm ready. The Cardinal's Council convened that afternoon in the same circular chamber where Theris had nearly been executed less than 2 weeks ago, golden light pouring through high windows exactly as it had then. I watched through Velmore's eyes this time, careful, deliberate, the same way I'd watched through Halden's during the Corrin investigation, present but unseen, listening for something specific. The session opened with routine matters, exactly as Velmore had predicted, administrative reports, budget discussions, the ordinary machinery of an empire grinding through daily business. Archbishop Drask sat near the center of the senior clergy section, an older man, silver-haired, with a kind of unremarkable, forgettable face that had clearly served him well for 34 years. When his turn came to speak, he rose with the careful, measured movements of someone who'd given 1,000 similar speeches, his voice calm, almost gentle, utterly unremarkable in every way. I'd like to commend the recent provincial investigations, Drask said, particularly the swift action in Corrin province. It's heartening to see the Flames' renewed attention to such matters. I felt something twist in my awareness, the deliberate, careful praise of something that, if my suspicions were right, this man had been quietly running for 100 years. However, Drask continued, I'd caution against moving too quickly across all provinces simultaneously. Investigations of this scale require careful resourcing and a measured pace. There it was, buried inside reasonable-sounding administrative caution, a suggestion to slow down, to give whatever Drask needed more time to react, adjust, and disappear whatever needed disappearing. A measured pace, Velmore repeated, quietly enough that only I could hear it, and I felt something sharp in his thought, recognizing exactly what I'd just recognized too. Before Drask sat back down, he bowed his head briefly. The formal, perfunctory blessing clergy gave before returning to their seats, a gesture so routine most people probably never noticed it. But I noticed, The system noticed too, a quiet ping arriving the instant Drask's head bowed. Prayer detected. Subject, Archbishop Selwyn Drask. Devotion, 0%. Channel status, anomalous. 0% devotion, but a channel existed anyway. Anomalous, the system's careful, clinical word for something it apparently couldn't categorize normally at all. I focused on it, carefully, the way I'd learned to focus on anything dangerous, approaching it the way you'd approach something in the dark you couldn't quite see but knew was there. What I found wasn't a prayer at all, it was a message, deliberate, addressed not to any god but to whatever might be listening, composed by someone who'd been expecting this for a long time. "I know you're there," the message said, in a voice that matched exactly the voice from Caressa's dream. "I've known for 3 days. You're faster than I expected, slower than I hoped. Both, somehow." I felt every instinct telling me to pull back immediately, but something steadier kept me listening. The same instinct that had kept me listening to Halden, to Joran, to everything that built this week. "You're wondering if I'm Caston Rye," the voice continued, conversational, almost pleasant, the tone of someone making idle observations. "The answer is complicated. Names matter less, after a century." "What do you want?" I asked, and felt the words leave me with more steadiness than I expected, given how fast whatever served as my heart felt like it was racing right now. "Want?" Drask repeated, and I felt something like amusement in it, old and tired and curious all at once. Nobody's asked that in a long time. Most assume they already know. Conquest, power, the usual things. "It's none of those," he continued. "What I want, what I've always wanted, is for it to stop hurting. The world. Every small, quiet cruelty repeating itself because nobody fixes the structure underneath it. By erasing people," I said. "By making families disappear from records, from memory, from existence entirely, like they were never born at all. By removing the parts that don't work," Drask said, and for the first time, something cold slipped into his tone, the cold of absolute certainty. "Every structure has flaws. Mine took a century to find them. On the people you erase," I said. "The families, the children, the ones who don't work. What actually happens to them in real terms, not euphemisms? They become part of something better," Drask said. "Painlessly, without suffering. One moment they exist, struggling, hurting. The next, they simply don't, and neither does anyone who remembers them." I felt something cold and furious rise in me, the same anger from learning about Corin Province, about 2 winters without heat, except scaled up to something almost incomprehensible now. "You're not removing flaws," I said. "You're removing people. Real people, with families, with lives, with prayers. The same prayers I've been hearing all week, the same small, ordinary hopes." "Ah," Drask said, and I felt something shift, the first genuine reaction I'd gotten from him, something almost like surprise. "You've been listening to them, really listening. That's unexpected." "That's the job," I said simply, the words feeling truer than anything else I'd said all day, or maybe all week long. "Is it?" Drask said, considering this, actually considering it. "The eternal flame has existed for centuries, and in all that time, never spoke. Never once. I assumed something new would be more of the same. Silent, distant, a symbol, nothing more," he continued. "But you've been listening to people. Really listening the way nothing in this world has. Not even me, not for a very long time." "I'm not the eternal flame," I said. "Not really. I'm something that ended up here, accidentally, and decided since I was here, I might as well actually do something with it for once." "Accidentally," Drask repeated, and I felt something like the beginning of genuine curiosity. "That's new. Everything else has a structure, a purpose, a design. Even my project has one, however cruel it seems. And you're telling me," he continued, "you're simply an accident with no plan, no design, nothing but whatever you happened to hear." "I am," I said. "And honestly, I think that's the only reason any of this worked. I didn't come in with a 100-year plan. I just listened and tried to help with whatever I heard, one prayer at a time." "And what you heard," Drask said slowly, "led you to Corin Province, to Caressa Vone, to Mira Kessler, to me, eventually, sitting in a council chamber like any other day." "Yes," I said simply, and felt the weight of that single word settle between us, an entire week compressed into one syllable. "In a week," Drask said, and for the first time I heard something underneath the careful, measured tone, something that might have been, after 100 years, the faintest edge of unease. "It took me decades to build what I've built," he continued. "You found the edges of it in a week, by accident, by listening, while I was busy planning structures and systems. People have been trying to tell someone about this for 100 years, I said. Caressa tried. Halden tried, in his own small way, every night for 11 years, never giving up entirely. Mira's been carrying it in her dreams for 18 months, I continued. They were never silent. Nobody was listening. That's the only difference, really, between then and now. And now someone is, Drask said. I find I don't quite know what to do with that information, which is, I should mention, an extraordinarily rare experience for me, after everything. Then maybe, I said carefully, this is a good time to stop. Not because I'm forcing you to, but because someone's finally asking you to explain yourself and actually listening to the answer. Instead of either ignoring you, I added, or trying to destroy you outright, the way everything else in your 100 years probably has, every single time. There was a long silence, longer than any pause in our conversation so far, and I felt the weight of it pressing against the chamber, against Velmore's careful stillness, against everything this week had built. The ruin, Drask said finally. You know about it. Caressa told you, whatever fragments she remembered from the survey logs, all those years she carried it alone. I know there's something there, I said. Something that altered Castanray, a century ago. I don't know what it actually is, not really, not in any way that makes sense. It's not a what, Drask said. It's a where. A place where the boundary between what is and what could be is thinner than anywhere else in this world, anywhere at all. Castanray found it by accident, he continued, the same way you found all of this by accident. He stood there and saw, clearly for the first time, every flaw in everything that exists. And it broke him, I said, the pieces sliding together. Not changed him into something evil. Broke him, with the weight of seeing every flaw in everything all at once. No way to fix any of it except one way. Yes, Drask said, and for the first time, the careful tone cracked, just slightly, just enough to hear something underneath that sounded almost like grief, old and worn smooth by time. 100 years, and nobody ever asked me that either, he continued. Not, what do you want? Not what happened to you. Just assumptions, then violence, when the assumptions proved insufficient eventually. What happened to you? I asked, gently. The same way I'd ask Halden or Joran. Anyone else who'd spent years carrying something nobody had ever bothered to ask about, not once. I saw everything that was wrong, Drask said, and I had 100 years and abilities from that place to fix it. Somewhere in that century I stopped being able to see anything else. Just the flaws, just the structure, he continued. Never the people inside it, struggling, hoping, praying to something that never answered. Not once in all that time. Until now, I said quietly, the two words simple, but carrying everything that had happened across this past week. All of it. Until now, Drask agreed, just as quietly, the two words carrying the weight of an entire century finally landing somewhere it could be heard. I felt something shift in the channel, something I couldn't fully describe. Like a very old, very heavy door creaking open after being sealed for a century, hinges groaning with the effort. I don't know how to stop, Drask said, and the admission carried weight I hadn't expected, the weight of someone who'd moved in one direction so long that any other felt physically impossible now. Nobody's asking you to stop everything at once, I said. Just stop adding to it, today, right now. The investigation's pike is running, the family's flagged. Can you halt whatever's in motion for them? That, Drask said slowly, I can do. The mechanisms are old, but they're mine. I built them. I can unbuild parts, at least the parts already in motion, starting today, immediately. And the ruin? I asked. Caressa's dreams, the marks on the map, all of it. What happens to that, going forward, after today? The marks represent 100 years of work, Drask said. I won't undo all of it in one conversation, even with someone who listens. But I can stop new marks from appearing while we figure out the rest. That's a start, I said simply, and meant it, even knowing how much further there still was to go after this. It is, Drask agreed, and I felt something settle. Not resolution, not really, but the beginning of something, the first careful step of a process that would take far longer than one talk. There's something else, Drask said. Caressa Vone, Mira Kessler, their squad, her unit, the people who disappeared 18 months ago, 3 years ago, however long ago. Some aren't gone, not entirely. I felt something sharp and sudden hope colliding with caution in a way that made whatever served as my chest ache sharply, all at once, without warning. What do you mean, not entirely? I asked, the words coming out faster than I intended, urgency bleeding through despite everything I'd learned about staying calm. The removal process, Drask said, the one I designed, the supposedly painless one, doesn't destroy, it relocates. To the ruin itself, the place where the boundary is thin, where things go without quite going. Everyone removed over 100 years is there, in a sense, he continued. Existing, but not quite, the way the marks on Caressa's dream map existed without anyone seeing them clearly. You're telling me, I said slowly, that Mira's squad might still be alive, somehow, in the ruin she's about to go investigate, after everything she's been through these 18 months? I'm telling you it's possible, Drask said. I genuinely don't know, not for certain. The process was designed irreversible by my own hand a century ago, when I believed that was a feature. But you can find out, I said. If Mira goes there, if she finds the ruin, is there a way to know for certain whether her squad or anyone else is actually still there waiting? There might be, Drask said. I'd need to go with her, or rather, someone would, someone who understands the place, the way it works, the way I do, after all this time. You're offering to go, I said, not quite believing what I was hearing, the offer landing somewhere I hadn't expected at all from someone like this. I'm offering, Drask said slowly, to undo, as much as I can, whatever I've broken, starting with the place where it started. It seems like the only place to start that means anything. I felt Theris's prayer flicker to life suddenly, sharp with urgency, cutting through the strange, careful conversation. Ren, the council session's ending. Drask is leaving. Decide now. Archbishop Drask, I said, through Velmor this time, loud enough, formal enough, that anyone listening would simply hear a cardinal's clerk addressing senior clergy after a session. A moment of your time, if you would, I continued, and felt Drask's attention shift, the careful, ancient awareness turning toward Velmor, who had unknowingly carried his orders for decades. Of course, Drask said aloud, his voice exactly as unremarkable as during his speech, nothing in it betraying the conversation that had just happened entirely outside normal hearing. There's an expedition departing for the northern wastes within the week, Velmor said, the words mine, spoken through him, careful and deliberate, each one chosen with care. Cardinal Velmor believes your expertise regarding the Imperial Archive's oldest records might be valuable to it, I continued through Velmor's steady voice, formal and ordinary. Does he? Drask said, and I felt, underneath the unremarkable surface, something that might have been, for the first time in 100 years, the faint, careful beginning of hope. How unusual, he added. I haven't left the capital in quite some time, not for anything like this, not in longer than I'd care to admit aloud. Perhaps it's time, Velmor said, and I felt the words carry more weight than their simple phrasing suggested, weight only 3 people in that entire chamber understood at all. Perhaps it is, Drask agreed quietly, and I felt something settle between us, not trust exactly, not yet, but the beginning of something that might eventually become that. That evening I brought everything to Theris and Mira together. The conversation, the offer, the possibility, however uncertain, that Mira's squad might not be entirely gone after all. Mira's reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't celebrate, didn't hope out loud. She just sat very still for a long time, the same careful stillness from our first conversation, processing. If there's even a chance, she finally said, then I have to go. Not might. Have to. 18 months of telling myself nothing could have gone differently, and now there might be something to do. It's not certain, I said gently. Drask himself doesn't know for sure. This could lead nowhere, Mira, and I need you to understand that before anything else. I know, Mira said. But for 18 months, nowhere is exactly where I've been. Anything else is better than that, even if it's just the chance of something else existing. Caressa, who'd been quietly listening throughout, spoke up for the first time. I want to come too, not to the ruin itself necessarily, but to help map the route from the survey logs. I memorized those logs for 3 years, she continued. I should be the one who finally gets to use that, for something that actually matters, instead of just carrying it alone. You'd be putting yourself at risk, Theris said carefully. If Drask is wrong about himself, if some part of him is still the architect, still operating the way it has for a century. I've been at risk for 3 years, Caressa said simply. At least this time, I'd be choosing it, instead of just hiding from something I couldn't even name out loud to anyone. I felt something settle in the room, the particular quiet that comes when everyone involved has made a decision, not lightly, but with full understanding of what it might actually cost them. Then that's the expedition, I said. Mira, Caressa, and Drask, with the strongest, most trustworthy escort the Empire's military can provide. Someone who can protect them if anything's still dangerous. Regardless of Drask's intentions, I added, in case I'm wrong about him, in case 100 years of patience hides something even he doesn't fully understand about himself. I can arrange that, Theris said. I'll have someone reliable assigned within the day. This expedition needs the best protection we can manage, given everything that's riding on it. Over the following days, the expedition came together with a kind of quiet efficiency that reminded me, again, how much this small group had already accomplished in less than 2 weeks total. Pike's investigations, with Drask's quiet cooperation now, began unwinding threads across all 6 provinces, families flagged for removal, processes set in motion but carefully, deliberately halted. Velmor oversaw it all with the steady competence of a man who'd spent 30 years following instructions he didn't understand, now helping undo the consequences with full understanding. Finally. Halden, in Corn Province, prayed every night, lighter prayers now, gratitude rather than bitterness, never knowing how close his small province had been to becoming part of something far worse. Joran, the street performer, got rained on twice more that week, complained both times. Both times I responded, briefly, casually. Small exchanges that had become some of my favorite moments in this entire existence. And finally, on the morning the expedition departed, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, not after everything, not after the council chamber, not after learning what Drask actually was. I felt nervous, genuinely, completely nervous, the way anyone would feel, sending people they'd come to care about towards something uncertain, something that might not end the way anyone hoped. "They'll be all right," Thera said, kneeling briefly at the temple altar before departure, her prayer carrying something steady, reassuring, the calm of someone who'd learned to hold uncertainty. "You don't know that," I said quietly, the words sitting heavier than I expected, as the morning light caught the spirit boat's hull, ready to depart toward the north. "No," Theris agreed. "But I know Mira's trained for exactly this. I know Caressa's spent 3 years preparing for it without realizing, and I know Drask genuinely wants to fix what he can." "And if he can't?" I asked. "If 100 years of damage can't be undone, no matter how much anyone, even him, wants it to be undone right now?" "Then they'll come back," Theris said, "and we'll keep doing what we've been doing. Listening, helping where we can. One prayer at a time, the way you started with one old woman." I felt something settle in me. Not certainty, not really, but something close to it, the quiet, steady kind of hope that comes from having already done hard things and survived them somehow. The expedition's spirit boat lifted off from the capital's eastern docks that morning, golden light catching its hull as it rose, carrying Mira, Caressa, Drask, and a small military escort north, toward the northern wastes, toward a ruin that had waited 100 years, toward whatever answers, or lack of answers, waited there for all of them, finally, after everything. I watched it go, through every shrine, every connection, every faint thread of awareness I had across the capital, until it disappeared over the horizon, heading steadily north into morning light. And then, because life in this strange golden existence didn't stop just because something enormous was happening elsewhere, I felt a new prayer form, small, ordinary, hesitant, gentle. It came from a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, kneeling at a small shrine in the eastern district, the same district where 2 weeks ago an old woman had prayed for her sick son. "Eternal Flame," the girl said. "My friend says you don't actually listen, that praying is just something grown-ups make us do, but my friend's brother got better last month after the temple helped." "So maybe you do listen," she continued. "So, hi, I don't really need anything. I just wanted to say hi, I guess, and see if you'd say it back to me, just this once." I felt something warm settle through me, something that had nothing to do with empires or conspiracies or 100-year projects, something simple and small and exactly what I needed right now. "Hi," I said, simple as that. 2 letters carrying more warmth than anything else I'd said in this entire strange existence so far. The girl's eyes went wide, and I felt a small, delighted laugh bubble up in her, the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who'd just had something extraordinary happen. "He said hi," she announced, presumably to whoever was waiting outside the shrine, her prayer dissolving into excited, happy chatter I couldn't quite follow anymore, but didn't need to. I sat with that small moment for a long time after it faded, the warmth of it lingering, the simplicity of it, after everything else this past week and a half had been. A week and a half ago, I'd been a dead F-rank hunter, crushed under 3 tons of stone, ignored by everyone, a punchline at every guild meeting, the guy who ran into walls. Now I was something else entirely, something I still didn't fully understand, something with the power to reshape an empire, confront a century-old conspiracy, offer comfort to a broken man. The first real conversation Drask had in 100 years, and somehow, also, the first time a small girl ever got an answer back from the god she'd been told never listened. But underneath all of that, underneath the politics, the investigations, the architect, the ruin, I was still, somehow, just someone who'd finally learned how to listen and discovered that was enough. The golden domes of the capital caught the morning light. 40 million people going about their lives below, most with no idea how close everything had come to being quietly, permanently rewritten. And how much of what came next would depend on a ruin in the north, a century-old conversation finally happening, and a small girl who just wanted someone to say hi back to her. I didn't know what the expedition would find. I didn't know if Mira's squad could really be saved, or if Drask could undo even a fraction of what he'd built, or if this was a beginning or an ending. But for the first time since waking up in this golden statue, crushed and dead and forgotten in another life entirely, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel at all. Not once, until now. I felt ready. Not because I had all the answers, not because everything was certain or safe or finished, but because, for the first time in either life, I had people who'd chosen to stand with me. Not because I commanded them to, but because somewhere along the way I'd actually listened and it had mattered. To them, to me, to an entire empire that had spent too long assuming nobody ever would. 40 million prayers every single day, and somewhere in all of them, always, would be someone who just needed somebody to say hi back, just once, just to know they'd been heard. I could do that. I could do all of it, one small voice at a time, the same way it had started, the same way, I suspected, it would have to continue, for as long as I existed in this borrowed life. The spirit boat disappeared completely over the northern horizon, carrying hope, uncertainty, and the first real chance in 100 years for something broken to finally, maybe, begin healing. And somewhere below, in the eastern district, a small girl ran to tell everyone she knew that the god had said hi back, and somewhere else, a boy played outside in warm sunlight, healthy and alive, completely unaware that any of this had ever happened at all because of him, because of one small prayer 2 weeks ago from a mother who'd simply needed someone to finally listen. That, I thought, settling into the quiet, golden warmth of the temple as evening approached, the city below finally drifting towards sleep, was probably exactly how it should be, for now, and for whatever came next.